This airliner crashed into a residential area, causing a massive explosion and fire due to the heavy fuel load. Of course, it had only just taken off and had that full tank of fuel. There's the strong possibility of further ground casualties of those who happened to be on the site where the plane crashed. Well, let's turn now to our Home and Security editor, Mark White.
Well, you're looking at images there of thick plumes of black smoke that are rising over this residential neighbourhood just outside the perimeter of this main airport in Ahmedabad. This aircraft was en route to Gatwick Airport. It should have arrived at Gatwick at 6:30 this evening, but only got as far as 625 feet above the ground. The images that we brought you earlier of that aircraft desperately trying to maintain height and to climb just before impacting with the ground are horrific. Of course, a fireball that then developed after the impact on the ground. And there are reports from the air regulator in India that the crew on board did manage to get off a Mayday call to the tower in the seconds before impact, which in itself is quite remarkable because quite often in these situations the aircrew would be so involved in just trying to keep that aircraft flying that they don't have time to put a Mayday out there. But a Mayday, it seems, was sent, and we have this very significant emergency service response in that neighbourhood, because it's not just the very considerable tragedy involved with the aircraft itself, with the 242 people who were on board the aircraft, but the many people on the ground in this residential neighbourhood. There are other images I've seen that show blocks that have been burnt out by this.
It is extraordinary to see, unlike perhaps in decades past when airplanes crashed, and we sort of don't quite know exactly what is going on at the early stage. In this instance, we have so much information. We've got so much video, so much picture. A video of the moment this crashed, video of the aftermath. I mean, what looks like hundreds of people, perhaps thousands, maybe many more, in the immediate vicinity. Looking at this aftermath, it brings home a sense of what it's like to be there in Ahmedabad, in Gujarat at this time, and seeing this awful tragedy unfold.
Oh, absolutely. You can see spectators there running around frantically by the looks of things, looking at what is very obviously an absolute tragedy. And just hearing those figures, it was clearly a packed flight, a busy flight, a standard flight. As we heard from Mark White, Charlie Peters' partner, Charlie Peters, our reporter, his partner, took the very same flight back in March. Interesting what she had to say about the state of the plane, because this model is a relatively new model, isn't it?
Exactly.
But that doesn't mean that each plane will be of the same standard as others.
It is a modern plane. I think these first started coming on commercial flights from 2011. Not a long time ago. There are many older planes that fly around the world. You would have thought that this plane, especially having flown 1 billion passengers since its commercial operations begun, being such a staple of air travel. I'm sure I've flown on one.
Yeah.
I'm sure. I mean, British Airways fly this plane, Virgin Atlantic fly this plane, TUI Airlines fly this plane as well. It is such a staple workhorse of the aviation industry, and no fatal crash on this scale that has ever been recorded before in one of these planes.
Well, absolutely. And, of course, the Foreign Office will be working overtime as Brits abroad and Brits in this country get in touch to hear any advice, and if they have concerns about friends and relatives, that's one port of call that you can get in touch with, because there will be many people in this country who have been this morning absolutely petrified that perhaps a relative or a friend could have been on board that flight. We know 53 British people heading back from India to the United Kingdom, to Gatwick, one of our biggest and busiest airports in the country, of course. And we're hearing from the authorities over in India that it was very much a calm day. The weather conditions stable, clear, as you can see there, the sun shining, no concerns in that regard, nothing to indicate that something like this would happen. And as Tom says, this particular aeroplane, good safety records, relatively new. The pilot, thousands of hours of experience flying planes like this, still yet to know what happened, but it seemed to be over in a minute or so.
Absolutely, and of course 53 Brits on board this Gatwick-bound flight. David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, has said in the last few minutes that we know that British nationals were on board, and I can confirm that the FCDO, that's the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, is working urgently with local authorities to support British nationals and their families, and has stood up a crisis team in both Delhi and in London. So that's the Foreign Office running now 2 crisis teams on 2 different continents to respond to this tragedy.
OK, well, in the studio with us is Mark White, our Home and Security Editor, who's been bringing us the latest throughout the morning and now into the afternoon. Mark, what are we hearing from the Indian authorities? I know we've had statements from Air India. The Prime Minister has also taken to social media to deliver his statement. Also hearing from aviation regulators over there. What else do we know?
Well, not an awful lot, to be honest. Just the regulators confirming that the aircraft itself, that the crew on board did manage to get off a Mayday call, but no indication from them as to what they think might be behind this, whether they believe it was some kind of technical malfunction, whether there could have been a bird strike, which, of course, we've seen in the past with incidents involving engine failure when birds, which are present around pretty much every airport in the world, can sometimes fly up and ingested into an aircraft engine, which can cause very significant issues, problems in terms of trying to keep those engines running, or whether it was some other kind of issue with the engine. Clearly, it was struggling to gain altitude, as is the desire of that aircraft getting up to its cruising altitude, and it was coming down. The aircraft itself, the nose, as you could see when it was coming in before impact, was tilted up, which indicates that, you know, the pilot was trying to get more air over the wing to, you know, try to get a bit more lift on that aircraft to keep it above the ground, looking, I'm sure, for some kind of clear space.
Yeah, Mark, just on that, because I'm just hearing from a friend of mine who's been a professional pilot for a long time, saying that you can see the AC has its landing gear down, which is one of the first things we raise at liftoff once getting a positive climb, and it appears to have its flaps up. That's a worrying indicator. It would 100% have a flap out, down, so you'd see it hanging out for takeoff, and they would have had a warning called a takeoff configuration alerting them as soon as they put the power on to take off, to say you have no flaps set. So for aviation experts out there who understand that, it does seem that there may have been some worrying indicators for those in the profession.
Well, why don't we put some of those questions to a former pilot, Emma Henderson, who joins us now down the line. Emma, thanks so much for being with us here on GB News, responding to this live and tragic incident. What can you see, having looked at that terrible footage of the last moments of this plane that were miraculously caught on video? What did you make of what could have possibly happened here?
Well, exactly as you've just said, that I wouldn't expect to see the gear down at this stage. So the first thing that we do, anybody who's ever travelled on an aircraft will know that as soon as you take off, you hear a noise, and that is the gear going back up to clean the aircraft up. So as soon as you've got any sort of positive climb, you call it, and then you get the gear up. So that is unusual. There are definitely some questions that are going to be asked about the flap configuration. So what that means is we deploy flaps on the back of the wing to make it more of a curved surface, and that allows us to create more lift. So that gets a heavier aircraft into the air. So that you set the flaps for takeoff to curve the surface of the wing. So either the flaps have been put up, may be out of sequence. One of the questions that will be asked would be, when the gear was called to go up, did the flaps go up instead? So that's a possibility. There will be questions asked about, did the engines lose power? We're trying to piece together at the moment, and obviously air accident investigators are going to be piecing together what caused this to happen.
Emma, just on that, can you explain exactly what you mean when you say flaps? So just
Yes.
for the layman who's looking at a plane, which part exactly is that?
Absolutely. So on the wing of the aircraft, when you look at a normal wing, it's ever so slightly curved, but fairly flat, but ever so slightly curved. So when at the back of the wing, if you're sitting on an aircraft next time you fly, you'll see literally exactly as that. They're called flaps because they are flaps of metal that come down at the back of the wing, and we move them down to take off. We move them down also for landing, actually. So there'll be several settings on the aircraft to curve the surface of the wing even more. And that's about lift generation. So they're literally just pieces of metal that are attached to the back of the wing. They're part of the wing surface, and they can move down and up in order to make the wing more curved. There's actually also more flaps at the front of the wing that we call slats, and that helps the wing to get an even more of a curved surface to generate as much lift as possible for when we're taking off, and to as much drag as possible for when we're landing, when we're trying to slow the aircraft down and come into land. So they are supposed to move. It has been the case in the past that the gear lever and the flap lever, so in the flight deck you have levers that you use to raise the gear when the call comes, and levers that you use to put the flaps into the right position. In the past, there has been a case where you've called for gear to go up and the wrong lever has been used. Is that a possibility? That would be one of the things that's being looked at by the investigation team.
So to be clear, in the video that we have seen of this plane in its final moments, these flaps, to your trained eye, looked like they were in the wrong position.
They do from what I can see in the video, they do look in the wrong position. The gear is definitely down. The nose is definitely higher than I would expect to see. So yeah, but obviously, as always with these things, what I have also seen is a photo of the tailplane of the aircraft in a building, which means that the black box, it's always the black box that's the key to these things. And
that's kept in the aft of the aircraft. So that likely, I've seen exactly the photo that you're referring to. It's likely, given that sort of rear end of the plane is intact, or at least as intact as it could be, stuck in half of the building, that would mean, in your view, that the black box hasn't disintegrated, would be recoverable.
There's a very good chance of that being the case. It should be the case. I mean, I would expect the investigation teams to be in possession of that now and be looking at it.
Okay.
Because, of course, what everybody wants, and particularly, for the families who've so tragically lost so many people, they want answers as to what has happened to their loved ones. And in aviation, we want answers to make sure that we know what's happened, so that instantly things will be put in place to make sure that can't happen again. So aviation always learns from these terrible tragedies. And the way we learn is to find out that information, which is stored in the black box, the cockpit voice recorder. All of that is stored there and will be extracted, so that literally it's like putting a jigsaw puzzle together. So all the pieces will be placed together so that we can see a full picture of what happened between the moment that aircraft took off and the moment it crashed into the ground.
Emma, just also hearing from people in the profession who've been flying planes for a long time, just for you to maybe confirm, or your opinion, that the aircraft didn't appear to have many obvious engine issues, e.g. fire. The rudder would be used to control the AC if an engine failed. There's no obvious fire of coughing, spluttering from engines, so unlikely they were struggling with an engine failing. It could be a case that both failed, but unlikely.
Yeah, certainly from what the video I saw, there was no smoke coming from the aircraft. There didn't appear to be any kind of twisting or turning, implying that one engine had been lost. It appeared to be otherwise a perfectly normal aircraft. One of the questions they might be looking at is was there a loss of hydraulic fluid which might have trapped the gear down? So that may be one thing that they will certainly be a question that will be asked. But the reasons for, the questions that will be asked will be, why was the gear down? Was the configuration correct? Where did the aircraft take off from on the runway? Did it take off from the correct takeoff position? And if it did it have the correct performance? Were the performance calculations correct for that takeoff roll, for that weight, for that temperature, for that airport? So all of these will be questions that investigators will be asking and seeking answers from the black box. And I imagine throughout the day and throughout the coming days, we will get obviously lots more information on what's happened there.
Now, Emma, we've been talking about that remarkable video of those final moments of this aircraft. I wonder if you could talk through. We will be playing it again. I just need to issue a verbal warning to anyone watching on television that this might be distressing for some viewers. But Emma, I wonder if you could talk us through what you see in this short clip here as we see this plane descend.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, as the aircraft appears on the screen, you can see its nose is higher than it should be. It looks like it's descending, not climbing. You can see clearly that the landing gear is down, and you can see it just flying over the roofs of the buildings. And then when it disappears, you obviously then see the big plume of black smoke as you realise that it's horrific to watch, because what we're actually seeing, remember, is the loss of more than 200 lives. That is horrific to be actually able to watch. And that's the times we live in, isn't it? But you can see that very, very clearly, that otherwise it looks like a perfectly normal aircraft.
Emma, it's Mark White here. Can I ask the fact that the nose of that aircraft was up, does that look to you like the pilots were trying to extend the glide to get some more lift over the wings to try to keep airborne as long as possible?
That is a potential scenario, yes. It may be that, pretty awfully, it may be that they realised that they were going to crash and they were trying to avoid buildings. That'd be one thing they might have been trying to do. And the way to do that would have been to convert altitude for lift, for height. But, they didn't have any altitude to convert. So, it was a pretty horrific situation for them to have been in. And, I think worth probably remembering as well that the pilots almost certainly will have known what was about to happen.
That might explain it as well, why we're seeing that tail section, that very end tail section, almost intact. I remember quite a few years back now covering the crash of a Turkish airliner at Schiphol Airport, and they were doing exactly that, trying to extend the glide to make the runway, and it struck the ground tail first, the tail sheared off, it then crashed down and broke into 3 bits along the sort of the main stress points of that aircraft.
Yeah, I was flying that day, actually. I remember that happening. So, wow. Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I think, obviously, all we can do is wait and find out what has actually happened. We can kind of, what we can say at the moment is that aircraft looked like it was otherwise normal. The gear was unexpectedly down. Yes, the configuration wasn't what we'd expect to see, but in every other way, that aircraft looked like it was normal. And, for the families who've lost people, of course, they're going to want those answers that will come. We've got to be very careful, obviously, with speculation, because we don't want to put any projections as to what may have happened and do that incorrectly. But there are definitely some anomalies here and questions that we want to have answered. And of course, at the core of all of this is, the families who are arriving at Gatwick from the UK, obviously, to be met by the worst news possible. So we need to find answers. We need to tread carefully over the next few days, tread carefully with the emotions of those families.
And Emma, you say it's likely that the pilots would have known what was happening, given the configuration of that plane, that they were perhaps trying to avoid buildings, all the rest of it. Would the passengers have known what was about to happen?
I think that's fairly unlikely. Seasoned passengers may have wondered why it didn't feel the same climbing as it should have been. People who, there may have been former crew on board who may have thought it doesn't feel quite right, but how much time there would have been between that realisation and what actually happened is impossible to say. Unfortunately, I would suspect that, yes, the pilots will have had some indication that something had gone wrong. And they almost certainly would have known that what was happening wasn't what they were expecting to happen. And I expect they will have had time to have processed that. And, I think we have to tread carefully around that as well. That's, as a professional pilot myself, that's a horrific thing to imagine.
Absolutely. Emma, thank you so much for being with us this afternoon on this. There's been quite a lot of estimations made about how much fuel might have been on board. From your experience for a flight like this, from India to the United Kingdom, how much would there have been for that length of flight?
Well, you'd expect to be carrying quite a lot. Obviously, it's a long flight. I'm not sure exactly what the length of the flight is, and I don't know what the fuel burn is on a 787 because that's not my aircraft type. But
right.
We would work on 2 tons an hour for an A320. So if you are expecting it to be a sort of 12, 13-hour flight, you can expect there to have been maybe 30 tons of fuel on board at least. So, and obviously just after takeoff, all of that fuel is pretty much still there.
Yeah, and that's one of the extraordinary things. I mean, just thinking back to other plane crashes in history or events that are unlike this, but similar in some ways. I mean, in the 9/11 attacks, the reason they used those planes so soon after takeoff is they wanted them to be absolutely full to the brim of fuel. Crashes, I suppose, upon landing can sometimes be less deadly than crashes upon takeoff for that very reason.
Well, yeah, it makes sense, doesn't it? That, when you're coming into land, you've got reserve fuel, you've got reserves in your tanks, but there's, a lot less fuel, especially if you're doing a long flight. The longest flight that I would have operated in Europe would be 6 hours. So I might have maybe 18 tons of fuel on board. And by the time I get to the other end, it might be down to sort of 2 or 3 tons. So, of course, if there's less fuel, there's less fire. But having said that, that's still a lot of aviation fuel. So, and it depends what causes the crash. If you're coming into land and something goes wrong, then it might be that you're slower. You're already lower. There's all sorts of reasons why that could work out to be slightly less damaging in some ways. But certainly this is almost the worst scenario, isn't it? Taking off with fully loaded with fuel and then crashing into a bit. We all saw the explosion happen. And, that's almost an infinite fuel source.
Terrible. And Emma, sorry, so many questions for you this afternoon, but the regulator put out that the captain had 8,200 hours of flying experience. The co-pilot had over 1,000 hours of flying experience. For those who have absolutely no idea what that means in terms of experience, that sounds like a tremendous amount of experience, is it?
Well, 8,500 hours was what I had when I stopped flying for EasyJet. So, that's a pretty high experience level, certainly. So in the left-hand seat, yes, 8,200 hours, that's an experienced captain. 1,000 hours, it's not inexperienced in the flight deck. It's not a brand new pilot, but it's, that's somebody who's probably been flying for, they might have only been flying for a couple of years. But, the experience levels in the flight deck, because there was an experienced captain there, we have to remember that pilots go through very, very rigorous training in order to be able to get licenses in the first place. So both pilots were equally qualified on the aircraft type. Yes, one of them had slightly less experience. That will definitely be one of the things that's being looked at by the investigators. Were the experience levels right? Was there what's the culture in the flight deck? Was there a strong command gradient? So, some cultures have been known in the past to have very sort of steep command gradients where you've got very senior captains who don't want to listen to very junior first officers. I'm absolutely not saying that that's the case here, but it will be something that will be looked at. Was there a question over that?
And huge questions, of course, in terms of what could possibly have caused this. I mean, some speculation online that the flap's in the wrong position. I mean, could that have been a mechanism that was jammed? Could that have been user error? Could it have been... I mean, it's very, very hard to sort of try and speculate, really, over what could possibly have gone on to cause this tragedy.
Yes, and all of those things are possibilities, and that's why we have to be very careful not to speculate and wait for answers from the black box, which come very quickly. You know, once that information is secured by the relevant authorities, which I suspect it may well have been already, or will be very quickly secured, you know, that will then be, as I say, you know, that will be gone over with a fine tooth comb to make sure that all the answers come out. And so, you know, we have to be very careful. It's always the thing that we want to do now is always, we want answers immediately, and we can't have those. We have to, you know, be very careful about that and make sure we are waiting for facts to come out. So in aviation, we do work with facts. We don't tend to work with conjecture. Of course, we all want to sort of have our comment about what, you know, it's a fact that we could see that the gear was down. That's not a normal thing to happen. What we don't know is why. So, you know, those things, the video will actually be helpful to the investigating authorities because they can actually see the aircraft as it was, you know, supposed to be in the takeoff climb. So things like that will be really useful. And we do have to be very careful. You know, everything you read online isn't always true. And we've got to make sure we're not kind of feeding, you know, rumour mills and making sure that we are waiting for the facts to come.
And Emma, just on the facts in the black box, will the black box answer all the questions? You know, for people who don't know, what will the black box tell us?
So the black box is not actually even black, it's orange, but the black box contains all the information that, as long as it's being transmitted, of course, it contains all the information that you need to know about the flight. So it'll be things like what was the airspeed, what was the altitude, what was the flap setting, what was the gear setting, what hydraulic pressure was there, what fuel was on board, what rate of fuel flow was there, the state of the engines. There's also a cockpit voice recorder, so there will be anything that was being discussed in the flight deck, any transmissions between the flight and air traffic control. It's all the data that surrounds the operation of the flight. And, you know, aircraft are very, very highly advanced these days. So there's, you know, the more advanced they are, like, you know, the same with the Airbus, the more advanced aircraft are, the more information we have access to. So that's what is contained in the black box, and that holds the key to everything.
And they're pretty much indestructible, are they, these black boxes?
Absolutely. Absolutely they are, yeah. They're designed to withstand huge forces and huge temperatures.
Well, let's hope that can be recovered quickly. But of course, sometimes these investigations can take many, many months before we hear some sort of answers. I mean, I fear this question might be a bit like how long is a piece of string? But I mean, how long might it be before we start learning some hard and concrete facts about what happened?
Well, something like this is almost certainly going to take a very long time, because it's going to take a long time to piece together. You know, obviously there are parts of the aircraft that are still intact and parts that aren't. So they're going to need to piece together what they think might have happened. It might be that the information they get from the cockpit voice recorder in the black box points very clearly to one thing, and therefore it might be a very quick investigation. But if there's no conclusive evidence from the black box and the cockpit voice recorder, then of course it's going to take a long time to try and work out, you know, from what's left of the aircraft, what exactly happened. But of course, these things, you know, things need to take time, because we want to make sure that we're doing it as thoroughly as we possibly can. So, you know, it is how long's a piece of string, but I would suspect that we will have some more answers within the next 24 to 48 hours once that black box and cockpit voice recorder is recovered. Information will be released as soon as it can be, as soon as there's a certainty. So I expect in the next couple of days we should have a little bit more information on this. The full investigation will take years.
And this, of course, comes at a time of perhaps great wider concern about air travel. I mean, just on this show in the last 6 months, the number of plane crashes that we've had to report, both smaller planes, the helicopter crash over the Potomac in Washington, D.C., the South Korean plane crash coming into land, hitting a wall on the runway. I mean, the number of plane crashes that we have covered this year seems to be out of the ordinary. I mean, what is going on in the industry?
Well, certainly I've been on this show more times this year than I had expected to, talking about exactly this. And I agree with you. But, you know, what you've got to remember is that there are 100,000 flights airborne on any particular day at a time. And so it's big news when one goes wrong. It's not newsworthy when, you know, as I've literally just stepped off a flight from Luton to Inverness, where I live. And I'm actually at the airport now. There's nothing interesting about that flight. You know, it took off. It flew to where it was supposed to go. It landed. Everybody got off. So we have to put that in perspective. And whilst this is it's absolutely horrific tragedy, we do have to remember that you know, 5 minutes later another aircraft took off. Maybe not from that particular aircraft, given what's happened here, airport. Sorry, but you know, flights take off and land all around the world without incident every single day. When something goes wrong, it involves a large number of people. We all have videos on our phones, so it's easy to get access to news as it happens. And it's a big story because it's something, you know, we don't want to happen. We don't know the answers. So it becomes big news. So I think it's really worth remembering that. I don't think there's anything going wrong with the industry particularly. I think that what we're seeing is, you know, every single incident that we've spoken about in the last 6 months has been caused by a different thing. And whenever you put a metal vehicle in the air with hundreds of people on board, there is an element of risk, in the same way as there is when you sit in a metal box and drive to the airport. You know, life has risk, and you know, that's something that we have to manage every day in the flight deck. We manage risk. And, you know, so there are times when things aren't going to go to plan, and obviously with tragic consequences today. But what we do very well in the industry is we will learn from this accident. We will learn from this terrible thing that's happened, and procedures will be put in place immediately. As soon as something is known as being a true fact, procedures will be changed and put in place immediately to make sure that can never happen again. So, you know, anybody who is a nervous flyer is going to be looking at this and thinking, I can't possibly get on a plane again. And I would say, you know, despite all of these things, air travel is still safe. It is still the safest form of transport. It is still more safe than, you know, perhaps we've become desensitized to road crashes, for example, because they seem to happen all the time. But, you know, air travel is still safe. There are still hundreds of thousands of flights getting airborne around the world every day that land perfectly safely. And it's just incredibly sad when something like this happens.
Yeah, well, Emma Henderson, thank you so much for staying with us for quite so much time and answering all of our questions there. Really do appreciate your expertise on this developing story. That's former airline pilot Emma Henderson.
Yeah, it's so interesting to hear from someone who's been a pilot for so long, so many hours of experience. We're hearing from London Gatwick, which is where the plane was heading. They've released this statement. We can confirm flight 171 that was involved in an accident on departure from Ahmedabad airport today was due to land at London Gatwick at 6:25 BST. The Boeing 7878 aircraft had 242 passengers and crew members on board.
They added London Gatwick is liaising closely with Air India, and a reception centre for relatives of those on board is being set up at Gatwick, where information and support will be provided. Our thoughts are with the family and friends of those on board.
And we've also heard from the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, today. He says the scenes emerging of a London-bound plane carrying many British nationals crashing in the Indian city of Ahmedabad are devastating. He added he was being kept updated as the situation develops. We've also heard from Flight Radar. They say they received the last signal from the aircraft just seconds after takeoff. Well,
of course, there were 242 people on board, 53 of them, we understand, to be British. Mark White, our Home and Security Editor, is with us in the studio. Mark, what more do we know?
Well, we've just heard from the Foreign Secretary actually speaking in the Commons. I don't know if we'll be able to get that clip for you at some point, but he said that the Foreign Office has arranged a crisis team in India, and of course is making provision for the families back here in the UK, with 53 British nationals confirmed to have been on board. He told Parliament that my thoughts, and I'm sure those of the entire House, are with those who've been affected by the tragic plane crash in India this morning. He goes on to say, we know that British nationals were on board, and I can confirm that the FCDO is working urgently with local authorities to support British nationals and their families, and to stood up crisis teams in both Delhi and in London. So that the Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, speaking in the Commons. We should say we were bringing you, in some of the images we showed you, you could see burnt out blocks of flats, accommodation blocks there. One of the blocks that was struck by wreckage from this aircraft was an accommodation block for local doctors. There are reports, as being reported by the ANI news agency in India, that one doctor, they were sitting down having lunch at the time, managed to jump out of a second floor window to safety. Another building, we're told that 30 bodies have been recovered from inside this building, and that rescue teams are working to pull other people from under the rubble. So what we don't know, of course, in that statement from local news agencies in India is whether the 30 bodies inside this property were people who lived or worked in the premises that were struck by wreckage from the aircraft, or whether they may have been people on board the aircraft when the aircraft impacted the building. Sadly, they're deposited within inside that building as well. So we don't know that at this stage, but I think it's inevitable there will be significant casualties on the ground, because some of those images that we've been showing as well just a few moments ago showed tower blocks, or at least blocks of 4 or 5 stories that were burnt out, with rescue teams on the ground trying to sift through those areas.
And we're beginning to understand the potential scale of this incident. We will let you know if we hear any figures on fatalities, injuries and so on. But we can now bring you that clip of David Lammy, who's made a statement, our Foreign Secretary, in the House of Commons.
Well, Mr. Speaker, my thoughts, and I'm sure those of the entire House, are with those who've been affected by the tragic plane crash in India this morning. We know that British nationals were on board, and Mr. Speaker, I can confirm that the FCDO is working urgently with local authorities to support British nationals and their families, and has stood up a crisis team in both Delhi and in London.
Well, that was David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, speaking some moments ago in the House of Commons. We can bring you now live pictures from Ahmedabad, where we can see the tail of that plane lodged in a building. Some reporting has suggested that this was a sort of hostel of medical students. Of course, the crash site very near to a regional hospital there in Ahmedabad, a major city in Gujarat within India. An extraordinary image, and we are getting so many extraordinary images because it is such a populated part of the world. I think one of the most remarkable things about covering this story, having covered a number of air crashes in recent time, is just how much instant image we have of what has taken place. I mean, sometimes we have to struggle replaying the same things again and again, but now here we see live pictures of the tail end of this aeroplane, and this is just one of the many extraordinary images that we have seen over the course of the past couple of hours.
OK, well, we can now speak to Aman Bogal. Aman, sorry to speak to you today about something so terrible that we're all witnessing today. Aman, you're a British Indian yourself, aren't you?
Indeed.
Do you know the area? Do you know Ahmedabad?
Yes, indeed. It is Western India, it is Gujarat. Of course, we in Britain have a huge number of Gujarati origin people living in the UK, British Indians, British Gujaratis. I know the area well. I've been there many a time. In fact, I was there probably about 6 months ago last. It is a wonderful place. It is very modern and it is very well kept. And of course, this plane has crashed into a very packed residential area, which we have seen the pictures of. But you know what? I see from a lot of reporting that people are coming together to respond to this in a way that is quintessentially Indian. The fact that the Indian Home Minister is already on the ground from Delhi in Ahmedabad, the Civil Aviation Minister has landed there, and I'm also hearing that Prime Minister Modi himself, of course, he is a Gujarati himself, as you will know, and he is flying there too. What's also of note is that this flight that comes from travels between Ahmedabad and Gatwick is in fact a product of what we've seen in the Indian aviation sector over the last 10 years, which is a rapid increase in aviation and flights. So these flights to Gatwick, there's a few of them that go from Gatwick to Ahmedabad, Gatwick to Amritsar, Gatwick to Bangalore. And these were brought in to help facilitate easier travel between the regions in India and London, where so many British Indians reside. So it's quite remarkable that this has happened because, you know, 3,000 flights a day happen across India domestically every day. Every day, 500,000 people fly across India. And the last serious crash was in 2010 when a Boeing 737 overshot the runway landing from Dubai in Mangalore. So, you know, it's a real tragedy. But in fact, I'm supposed to be flying on a similar flight quite soon. So,
with Air India, Aman, do you usually fly Air India when you travel to India?
Well, indeed. So whenever I fly to Amritsar, it's always easy to take the direct flight from Gatwick, which is the night flight. It takes off, you know, in the evening, and you land in Amritsar nice and early, nice and fresh. And it's only a, 8.5-hour flight. And funnily enough, it is also a Boeing 787 Dreamliner. And these have been a workhorse, as I think Tom was saying earlier, for the last decade. For Air India. And Air India was one of the first airlines that took on the Dreamliner. I think some of your viewers might recall that in the initial phases, the Dreamliner had a lot of issues with its onboard batteries, which used to catch fire. And of course, it's had an impeccable record since. The other thing to note, of course, about Air India is that until January this year, it was still, you know, a relic previously of old India, of socialist India. You know, it started off its life, Air India did, as a private enterprise by Tata back in the 1930s, and it was nationalized under socialist governments in India in the 50s. And it's come a full circle after going bankrupt multiple times, heavily unionized in the past, and Tata took over Air India thanks to Prime Minister Modi's economic reforms, you know, disinvesting into a lot of these formerly state-run enterprises. And it's beginning to turn around a corner in the sense that it's, you know, cut its losses by about 40%. It's becoming far more leaner. But of course, this does raise some serious questions, I think, of Boeing. Of course, they will have their teams who will be looking at a lot of the maintenance, and we can't even say at the minute whether it was maintenance related or whatever it was.
No, although what we can see and have seen through live pictures we were bringing some moments ago is that that tail section of the aircraft is completely intact, lodged in the side of a building that we understand to be some sort of hostel for medics or medical students. And we do know that the so-called black box, the flight recorder of aeroplanes, are kept right in the tail section there. It tends to be the part of the airplane that sort of survives crashes the most. So we could be learning quite a bit more relatively soon. And we can. I need to tell everyone watching on television that the following footage that we're going to play may be distressing to some viewers, but we can watch again the final moments of this aircraft coming down in what it looked like to land, and it is just shocking to see. Let's watch this.
Yeah.
We should also say that local police are reporting that at least 100 bodies have been brought to a hospital in Ahmedabad. We'll bring you more information on that as we get it. But Aman, I mean, absolutely shocking footage there that we've just been watching. Very distressing indeed.
It is very distressing, and of course, you know, I fly regularly when I'm in India domestically.
What sort of routes, Aman? What sort of routes do you take?
So Delhi Ahmedabad is one, Delhi Mumbai, Delhi Bangalore, and of course a lot of regional flights. So the town of my birth in the Punjab is a town called Jalandhar, and it never used to have an airport, but you know what, it now does, and it's a very small airport, but it has a daily flight now between Jalandhar and Delhi, which has made my life a lot easier. But and it's a great service. It's only a 35-minute that cuts down a six-hour train journey or an 8-hour road drive. And that's the story that we see with aviation in India. You had 74 domestic airports in 2014, and now you have 175. As I said, 500,000 passengers a day. And the vast majority of it is, you know, private enterprise coming together to make it all work and make it happen. So the safety record in India is impeccable. The sheer numbers are mind-boggling, and to keep them all flying safely is quite a feat. But of course, this tragedy, let's not forget, a lot of the the people who have lost their lives in this are British Indians, and I can only imagine the grief that their families will be facing. And of course, this is we have multiple flights, more than I think 30 flights a day between London Heathrow, Gatwick, and India. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's an important point to make, because I think this is something that we often forget when reporting about cases like these, just how much aviation has expanded, even in the last decade. The number of new airports that have been built in India, in China, across Africa, as the world develops, as many more people become airborne, as many more flights take off than have ever taken off before in the history of the human race. Perhaps even very safe forms of transport, like air travel, simply because of the numbers. The proportions of people who are now flying, that very small proportion that do crash, well, it becomes a larger number.
Indeed, it does. And the fact that, you've seen this initiative across India of getting people airborne. And for example, the airport I was telling you about, in the town of my birth, it's actually what they've done is, and it's been repeated dozens of times across India for smaller airports, is they've basically added on a civilian terminal to a lot of the airstrips and the Air Force bases. So in peacetime, of course, the same runways become available for domestic civilian flights, and it's opened up such low-cost air travel. So, for example, I can tell you that a typical executive class rail ticket from Jalandhar to Delhi would probably cost you about, in pounds, about £15 one way, and that same flight is in the same route is also roughly about £15. So a lot of people are thinking, well, you know what? Why don't I just take this flight? Save me time. It's going to be much less hassle. And that's why it's taken off so rapidly.
And Amana, the obvious point, India, a hugely populous country, well over 1 billion people, a huge landmass as well. So people do need to take domestic flights. Aman Bagal, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you so much for coming on the show today to talk about something so tragic as well. We're going to head to Ahmedabad, where this incident took place, to speak to broadcast journalist Preya Mania. Preya, thank you so much for joining us. I imagine the people of Ahmedabad are in a state of shock at the moment. What can you tell us from the local authorities?
Well, good evening. I'm joining you from Ahmedabad, where today's Air India crash has sent shockwaves through the city. While I'm not at the crash site yet, I'm just about to go. What I can tell you from being based here is that local media and emergency updates are flooding in by every minute. Like literally now, hospitals and everybody who has been deceased or injured or majorly been affected, everybody has been asking around blood donations across the city because there have been more casualties than we could have ever imagined. The aircraft was reportedly attempting on an emergency landing when the crash occurred near Meghaninagar, which is a locality which is close to Ahmedabad airport, which is what initial reports suggest as well. And authorities, including the DGCA and NDRFs and rescue teams, they are now on the site, with 3 more on the way, and an investigation is underway to determine the cause. There's a noticeable rise in activity around the airport zone, and social media channels here, they're full of distress footage and local appeals for, blood donation support. And while the full scale of this tragedy is still unfolding, we're still about to know as how many people are dead, how many are not. There is a palpable sense of fear and grief across Ahmedabad tonight. I will continue to monitor.
Sorry, Preya. Do continue.
Sorry?
Sorry, do carry on.
Yeah, what I just recently received the update is we also had our former Chief Minister, Vijay Rupani, on the same flight as well. And unfortunately, he's passed away. And that's the only confirmed update for now that I can give you so far.
So that's a very senior politician of the BJP, of Narendra Modi's party, the former sort of regional chief minister there for Gujarat. And you're saying local media has confirmed that he's passed away on this flight?
Yes, unfortunately, it's such a heartbreaking news for the entire city as well as the nation today. But this is just an unfortunate tragedy that we all have been suffering, and people are still in shock, especially because all the people, the flight was literally boarded, and within the 2 minutes of it being off the ground, it crashed. I think from what I do receive, and I have got the updates from, is the pilot did try to actually send the signal, but somehow apparently the signal, by the time it could reach to the catered people, it crashed immediately. I'm still coordinating with contacts on the ground to gather more details and more confirmed news yet as we go on.
What can you tell us about the building that it appears to have crashed into? Some reports say that this was something to do with the hospital, a hostel for people who worked in the hospital.
It was actually a building. It's a hostel, actually, where it's a hostel where there are like 50 around doctors, and possibly there's an effect on them too. There are approximately around 50 doctors that have been said that either they are injured or maybe there's a chance that they could also be dead. But yet no news is confirmed yet. Everything is still unfolding because people are shocked. There are so many people at the civil hospital, and all the grounds, they are completely full of, still figuring out, what is going on and how many count of people they have been already dead and how many of them are injured. But definitely there are way too many casualties than we could have possibly expected.
And what's the hospital like there where you are? Have you been to that hospital before? Is it?
I'm about to go there.
Okay. Do you imagine it's very capable of dealing with something like this, a huge potential massive casualties entering the hospital at the same time?
Yes, I'm pretty sure there is. Apparently, because there are 3 NDRFs that have been sent already, and they're en route to the incident, to the place where this entire incident has taken place. So I'm sure we will get all the updates in the entire day towards, because it's still evening. It's 5:30, close to 5:30 p.m. over here in India. And I think we are still foretaking the entire news until the night.
Yeah.
So
OK, well, Preya,
we're yet to know exactly.
As you say, you're about to head over there to the site itself. I hope that perhaps we can speak to you a little bit later as well. Once
I will keep updating you once I reach to the location. Yes.
Thank you so much, Preya. That would be greatly appreciated. Good luck with your reporting. Preya Mania, thank you so much for joining us from Ahmedabad.
Thank you for having me.
Where that plane has crashed carrying 53 Brits and many other Indian nationals and others.
Well, still with us in the studio is our Home and Security Editor, Mark White.
Well, very sobering news coming through now from the Associated Press, quoting the police commissioner in the city of Ahmedabad, saying that there appear to be no survivors from the Air India airliner. So just repeating that, this is the Associated Press who are quoting the police commissioner for the city of Ahmedabad, saying that there appear to be no survivors from the Air India airliner. Now, we know that there are many injured people on the ground. Some survivors have been pulled from rubble, and also we know that other bodies have been taken to hospital. One report saying more than 100 bodies have been taken to area hospitals. But that important news with regard to the airliner itself, and perhaps no surprise, given the impact with the ground, that huge fireball, the black smoke that you're seeing rising over this populated area, revealing there was a huge explosion, and this aircraft obviously impacted the ground at a very significant rate of knots. But it appears, according to this police commissioner, that there are no survivors from this Air India airliner.
Well, absolutely devastating news that we can confirm that to you. No survivors from this plane crash, and we've seen the pictures now of the plane that's crashed into a building. Concerns now that there may be fatalities related to that particular building, which was host to medical students, medical professionals who are staying in that hostel. We could see that death toll tick upwards, couldn't we, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, I think this area, there seems to be a number of flats in this area that are being used to accommodate medical personnel, doctors and other medical personnel, which is ironic given, of course, their colleagues in nearby hospitals, perhaps their very own close friends are dealing with the injured from that terrible tragedy. But what we know is, as well as, of course, one block where there was significant damage, where doctors were sitting down to have their lunch at this time, there are multiple other buildings in this residential area that have been impacted by this 787 aircraft as it came down, with very significant casualties on the ground, it seems.
Yeah, and hearing that a senior politician, Indian politician, was also on board and has lost his life.
Yeah, no, absolutely awful, and there will be tales that come out of prominent and not so prominent people with a whole life and backstory whose life has been so cruelly ended in this terrible tragedy in the province of Gujarat.
And 11 children. I mean, the heart goes out to friends, relatives of those who have very sadly lost their lives. There will be people who are just receiving the news now who knew that a relative was on board that flight, or a friend or a colleague or anything else. We know there are a huge number of flights every day coming from India to Britain, domestic flights within India as well. This Boeing aircraft and the tragic images that we're bringing you throughout the afternoon. We'll bring you any more updates as and when we get them. Mark, thank you very much for everything and for bringing us the very latest throughout the day. We'll keep bringing you reaction from the ground in India as well. So do stick with us throughout the afternoon here on Good Afternoon Britain. Well, good afternoon, Britain. It is now 1 o'clock on Thursday, the 12th of June. Yes, the major breaking news this afternoon. The Air India flight bound for London Gatwick, carrying 242 passengers, including 53 Brits, crashed shortly after takeoff in India. Let's go to Tom, who has the latest.
That's right, Emily. Here's what we know so far. Flight Air India 171, a Boeing 787-8 Dreamliner, was due to fly from Ahmedabad to London Gatwick. Well, the flight crashed 5 minutes after takeoff at 1:38 local time. That's 9:08 British summer time. This is the first crash of a Boeing 787 Dreamliner since its introduction in 2011. Up to now, it had an impeccable safety record as an aircraft. It's flown by many airlines here in Britain, including British Airways, Virgin Atlantic and TUI Airways. Well, the flight crew made a Mayday call to air traffic control shortly after taking off, losing contact at just 625 feet. On board, there were 248 souls, 230 passengers, 2 pilots and 10 cabin crew. Of that number, 168 were Indian, 53 British, 1 Canadian and 7 Portuguese. We now can tell you that there have been no survivors. Well, the aircraft crashed into a residential area, causing a massive explosion and fire due to the heavy fuel load. Of course, shortly after takeoff, almost entirely full of fuel. There is, of course, the possibility of further ground casualties, including the building much of the aircraft crashed into, which we learn is a hostel for medical professionals. Well, let's get more now with our Home and Security editor, Mark White.
Well, you continue to see the images that we've been showing you all morning of the huge plume of black smoke that engulfed that area, as a fireball engulfed that area. That smoke high into the air as emergency services rush to the scene. And remarkable images as well that show the tail section of this aircraft embedded in a building that may be the building where doctors were living and perhaps having their lunch. We'd had reports of doctors that were sitting down to lunch at the time the aircraft impacted their building, and at least one of those doctors jumping from a 2-story window of that building to safety. And I think the images that show the aircraft in the back of the building, the back of the aircraft, perhaps indicate that the aircraft, as we saw in the images of it coming down towards the ground, descending before that crash and that fireball, might indicate that the pilot there was, in aviation terms, trying to extend the glide, trying to get more wind, more air over the wings just to keep it up. You can see that may be part of that wreckage from another angle. We think that is the hall, the building that the doctors were in when they were sitting down to lunch at the time that that impacted. You can see that it's not just that one building that didn't show any fire damage, but lots of other buildings and vehicles there that are burnt out. And that would account, I think, for the reports we're getting of very significant casualties on the ground, of rescue teams digging into the rubble to try and rescue people. So not necessarily people from the airliner, as sadly we've just confirmed that police commissioner in the city of Ahmedabad saying that they do not believe that there were any survivors on the airliner.
And yet still a significant cry from the local authorities for more blood to be donated from the local population, presumably because of all of the casualties on the ground, the people that were hit by the shrapnel of the plane, by the enormous amount of fuel that that plane was carrying too, the buildings that caught fire, that collapsed around it. I mean, this is, we keep talking about the numbers on board this plane and horrific numbers indeed, but many, many more people in the wider area affected, clearly.
You can see from these images now, in fact, that just switch to that image there is a perfect example of that. We had thought that this had come down, the aircraft had struck perhaps a building under construction, but it's clear, although it may have done that, it's also impacted other residential areas around there because it's travelling at such a high rate of knots, the velocity of such a heavy aircraft. It strikes one building, it doesn't stop, it continues on to other buildings there, and you can see that these buildings have been burnt out. Significant rubble on the ground, smoke still issuing from a number of these buildings as the rescue teams on the ground try to sift through the rubble to find any more survivors.
You're right, the level of damage here, the scale of the damage is far bigger than one might expect for a flight that was only in the air for a matter of moments, really. And just the shock there must have been. Lunchtime, you say this took place in Ahmedabad. We are hearing as well that flights have resumed out of that airport.
Yeah, I mean, it might seem counterintuitive that Ahmedabad airport would be open again so soon after a horrific tragedy. But the fact is, the aircraft crash happened outside the aircraft perimeter. There was nothing, we understand, on the runway prior to it actually gaining flight and then leaving the aircraft perimeter. So no debris, we don't think, on the runway that might have impacted the runway and caused an issue there. So yes, it's absolutely tragic, and the airport personnel just have to get on with it. And the Air India personnel, who will have seen their colleagues caught up in this horrific event, they just have to fly. That's the job they do. And so the airport, because the last thing you want to do in a busy airport like this airport in Ahmedabad would be to close the airport for very long periods of time. Even the few hours that it's been closed, there will be many, many passengers stacking up there trying to get out of their flights cancelled and diverted to other areas as well, other regional airports. So it'll already be causing significant chaos. They'll have been keen to get this operation up and running as quickly as possible. And that's why it's opened. As I say, it might seem a bit insensitive, but they've got a real crisis of lots of people that have to get places or have to land in that area who are up in the air and stuck, and they just need to get on with it and do that.
Much disruption can be caused by an airport having to close down for a short period of time. So, yes, you can imagine that they do want to get things up and running as quickly as possible, and they have done within a matter of hours.
Absolutely. You just think back to the substation fire a month or two back that affected Heathrow Airport and closed that airport for the whole day because of the generator issues they had there. And that caused many, many thousands of passengers real grief and delay and disruption to their plans. And it'll be exactly the same at the airport in Ahmedabad. And that's why they needed to get that operational as soon as possible. And the fact that this has come down a few kilometres from the airport allows them to do that now. OK, well, Mark White, thank you very much for now. We're going to speak to Christopher Hope, our political editor, to bring us some of the political reaction. Hearing from the Prime Minister, the Foreign Secretary. Christopher?
Sorry, Christopher Hope, are you there? We've been hearing from the Prime Minister in the
Yes,
in the
Emily,
last few
and hello,
moments.
Tom, from a very sombre Downing Street. Now, Keir Starmer said today that scenes emerging of a London-bound plane...
I think we've got a significant delay on the line. I do apologise for this. We will get back to Christopher Hope. Christopher, take it away. There will be some gap between when I finish speaking and when you start speaking, but that's just due to the significant delay on the line that we have.
Yep. That's like... OK, Tom and Emily, so we've heard from Sir Keir Starmer today. He's saying that scenes emerging of a London-bound plane carrying many British nationals crashing in Ahmedabad are devastating. He's been kept updated as the situation develops, he says, and his thoughts are with passengers and families at this deeply distressing time. Now, of course, Parliament is still sitting. We've heard moments ago from David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary. He says a crisis team in London and India has been set up. Here's what he told MPs moments ago.
Well, Mr. Speaker, my thoughts, and I'm sure those of the entire House, are with those who've been affected by the tragic plane crash in India this morning. We know that British nationals were on board, and Mr. Speaker, I can confirm that the FCDO is working urgently with local authorities to support British nationals and their families, and has stood up a crisis team in both Delhi and in London.
Well, that was the Foreign Secretary, David Lammy. speaking in the House of Commons this morning. But Christopher Hope, I believe we have now sorted the delay that we have with you. Clearly, huge political ramifications in this country for this incident.
Well, absolutely. There's 53 Brits we know look like they have died, given what Mark White's reporting there from the local police commissioner, saying there are no survivors on board on this Boeing 787 Dreamliner. There's more political reaction coming in as we speak. Kemi Badenoch, the Tory leader, she says that her thoughts are with all those affected, especially the families of those on board and the emergency teams responding to what appears to be a horrifying tragedy. Heidi Alexander, the government's transport secretary, she says that she is deeply saddened. Her thoughts and sympathies are with all those affected, and she's receiving regular updates on this emerging situation. And Nigel Farage, of course, he's the leader of Reform UK. He has experience of a plane crash, although in a light aircraft back in 2010. He's spoken moments ago to reporters. Here's what Nigel Farage told us.
As somebody who survived the plane crash myself, only just, when I see incidents like this crash, I shudder. And I say to myself that really, if you think about it, from the moment of conception to death, luck is the biggest factor in our lives. Doesn't matter how good we are, how bad we are, bad things can happen. So you know what? Live each day as if it were thy last.
There we have it, Nigel Farage, I think, with some very touching remarks there. Remarks, of course, he remembers when he was involved in that light aircraft crash in 2010. He knows what it's like, and it's saying that it's all luck, frankly, a lot of life, and words there that we reflect on today.
Certainly, it does seem to be the more the news that we hear out of Ahmedabad, the more tragedy seems to emanate out of this incident. Chris Hope, thanks for being there live on Downing Street for us. We'll catch up with you a little bit later in the programme.
Right, back to Mark. Of course, we have Mark White, our Home Security Editor, of course, here in the studio with us. Mark, we have a close relationship with India, an Indian trade deal, a huge Indian diaspora in this country. Many people will have friends, family, relatives. It's a common place for students to travel to on their gap years and whatever else. How long does it take for people to find out whether a relative or a friend or anything like that may have been caught up in this?
Well, they'll find out pretty quickly because they will have known that their loved ones will have been on this flight. I'm sure that the vast majority of family members will have been in contact with another family member to say, I'm taking this particular flight. So you would know, and then that would get confirmed to you either by the Foreign Office or the airport in a relatively timely manner. They get the passenger manifest within an hour or two in terms of being able to disseminate that potentially to people that are caught up in it. The longer wait, though, is for news as to whether their loved one has survived or not. And the news coming through from the local police commissioner in Ahmedabad is just not good at all. It clearly the worst possible news. That the indications are, so not 100%, but the indications are that there have been no survivors from the airliner itself, and many people obviously caught up in this on the ground. Of course, if you're a family member, you're going to be hoping against hope that your loved one might have somehow survived, may be one of the lucky ones. And we've seen that in airline disasters around the world. You do get miraculous survival tales from time to time. So we can only hope that, but it certainly does not look good. And sadly as well, I think for people on the ground, it's a very troublesome picture that we're looking at here. The devastation on that image there, the ground itself just churned up, all of the detritus, the debris wreckage from the aircraft just lying in mounds there. But actually the damage to the apartment blocks and vehicles, people that might have been walking around the local streets there, all manner of people could have been caught up in this. Now, the Foreign Office have their emergency crisis team on the ground in Ahmedabad as well, and they will be speaking to the local authorities there, trying to get as much information out of them as possible to feed back into the Foreign and Commonwealth Office to be able to hopefully disseminate that down to family members. But you're absolutely right. There are huge connections, very long-standing old connections between this former British colony and the UK, and many, many people in that big Gujarati community here in the UK. So an absolute tragedy for them as well as for the country to absorb this.
A huge number of people making those flights from Britain to India on the regular. Well, thank you, Mark. We're going to speak to aviation expert Anita Mendirata now on this. Anita, thank you very much indeed. Of course, terrible news to have to report that there are, according to local police, no survivors from this incident. I mean, we've been looking at the footage, we've seen the pictures this morning into this afternoon, and it appears as though it would have been a miracle had there been any survivors. What do we know about this particular flight and Boeing's history of such events?
It's quite remarkable, as you say, that there would have been any survivors. But importantly, there were no survivors on the aircraft. We still need to understand the survivor rate of those around it, because there's been such devastation to that actual location in Ahmedabad. Bearing in mind, because this flight was taking off, it was carrying between 130 and 140 tons of fuel, which just magnified the degree of devastation that's been taking place far beyond the aircraft. So the souls that were lost, sadly, that number is going to go up. Importantly, this is one devastating flight based on over 100,000 to 150,000 that take off every single day around the world across all airlines. This particular aircraft, the Boeing 787, is at the forefront of technology and innovation when it comes to aviation. It was launched in 2011. Recently, Air India in 2023 actually put an additional 200 into its order books as a real testimony to the relationship and the trust between Air India and Boeing. Importantly as well, this aircraft is very critical when it comes to the future of sustainable flight, as it's very much focusing on reducing emissions, much more fuel resourceful, much more effective for long-haul flying, and much lighter as an aircraft. So it's critical in terms of aviation as a development for the entire aviation community, not only Air India. But this is a long-standing, over 60-year relationship between Air India and Boeing, which is going to be made even stronger, sadly, because of this shared devastation.
Not on this particular model, but Boeing has had problems with the 737 model, haven't they?
It has. They had a devastating, I keep using the word devastating, which is sad, but that's the only word to describe the situation. They had a very bad 2024 where a lot of the impacts of the fatalities that they had in two crashes with the 737 MAX were put into the legal environment. And then they also had technical issues with, as we know, other aircraft. So Boeing, unfortunately, has had a very hot spotlight on them because of issues around manufacturing quality and aircraft safety. But this aircraft itself, the 787, has never had an incident like this before. Importantly, Boeing, with its new leadership of Kelly Ortberg, has prioritized making sure that the entire company puts as a priority quality and safety of all of its aircraft manufacturing, which regulators are keeping a close eye on and supporting as Boeing comes through a very difficult time, looking at it very much, again, its airline partners and customers as a reflection of the confidence of Boeing's future.
I mean, absolutely extraordinary to see this happen to an aeroplane that had, for all intents and purposes, seemed as like a very, very safe aeroplane that had carried more than 1 billion passengers over the course of the last 14 years that it's been in commercial operation. And yet, for Boeing, this comes just a month after they agreed to pay a $1.1 billion settlement with the US government over the fallout of that 737 MAX scandal. This is a very, very troubling time for Boeing as a company. His shares in pre-stock market trading this morning, of course, markets don't open for another hour and 10 minutes in New York, but in pre-trading, they have declined precipitously.
Indeed. And importantly, this is where the leadership of Boeing is very important. Kelly Ortberg, who took over at Boeing almost a year ago, so in August of 2024, has again been very vocal, very visible, and very transparent in how it's going to transform Boeing as an organization, both in terms of manufacturing and the culture of commitment to quality and safety of flight. So it's been a devastating time for Boeing and for Air India. And this is where we're going to find that the partnership between the CEO and his leadership team at Boeing and the CEO of Air India, Campbell Wilson, and his leadership team, how they manage this is going to be vital in rebuilding the trust and confidence in not only Air India and Boeing, but in aviation as a whole. As much as aviation is incredibly awe-inspiring for how it gets us to look up in all the possibilities that it creates, moments such as these really do put our focus on the fear factor that is ultimately behind the magic of flight.
Yeah, and so many different people and organisations will be under the spotlight over this. Of course, Boeing, you say, Air India, of course, the airport, Ahmedabad airport, also the authorities, the emergency services that have had to deal with this. We were just discussing a little earlier how quickly the airport has got back up and running. Flights going out of the airport as close to normal as it can be, I suppose, after a horrific incident like this. But it is very important, isn't it, when so many people are relying on air travel for things to get up and running as quickly as possible.
You're absolutely right. And particularly in the UK, as you were speaking earlier in your commentary, we feel it very closely, having gone through the recent incident at Heathrow when it was shut for the day. Because if you look at it, that aircraft was carrying leisure travelers, business travelers, and cargo as well. And this is why it's important that there be a parallel path at the airport in Ahmedabad, focusing on continuing to let airport operations flow, but at the same time, remaining very much focused and compassionate around what's happening with the recovery efforts for any survivors on the ground, recognizing the severity of the trauma that's being felt by not only the family and friends of those people that were involved in the loss of those souls on board, and in terms of both passengers and crew, but also the entire aviation industry. All of us, you and me as passengers, this affects us all. So there's really no one that is not going to be hurting because of this. And that's why the healing that is going to be led by leadership will be very important to keep us all confident about our ability to safely travel to the people and places that we love.
Now, unlike many of the recent plane crashes that we've reported on, read about in the last 6 to 12 months, this is in a highly densely populated area, in bright daytime, clear conditions. The amount of video footage, frankly, that we have is breathtaking, is astonishing. And we do have one video of what appears to be the final moments of this aircraft. We've spoken to a number of aviation experts like yourself, Anita, over the course of this afternoon, who seem to suggest that there were unusual things about that aircraft as it was coming back down to land. Let's remind ourselves of that footage, and perhaps off the back of that, Anita, you can tell us what you notice about the aeroplane with your expertise. Just a warning for viewers on television, what we're about to show may be quite distressing for some viewers.
What's very important when we look at the aircraft when it's actually landing and taking off. In this case, again, it was taking off, carrying between 130 and 140 tons of fuel. It basically went down the runway, and we know that a Mayday call went in. The explosion was magnified again by the excess amount of fuel. The sad thing is that in the thrust and the acceleration, when an aircraft takes off, which can go to up to 180 knots, the force and the power is immense. You spark that off and you're going to get these massive explosions. What is curious about this is that the landing gear seems to have not been retracted, and the flaps themselves, I beg your pardon, the landing gear was still there. It's been retracted, but the flaps were still down. These are, again, all initial claims. The reports, the investigation will give us the accurate detail. What happened with the landing gear? What happened with the flaps? What happened with the pilot? Was there notification? Was the Mayday based on an issue with operations or with even their own physical operations as crew? All of these things need to be established. And that's why so much of this is a hypothesis. And we need to be very, very careful to make sure we're not distracted by what are suggested as what could have gone on, who was to be blamed, what is happening next, who should be ultimately held accountable. We need the facts first. And at the same time, to remain focused on those that are still struggling through.
Of course, because even if, as appears, that the landing gear was down in an incorrect fashion, the flaps were down, not up, whatever it is. I mean, sure, that could have been human error, but that could also have been mechanical error.
Yeah.
I mean, that could have been... it's so hard to know at this stage, actually, what caused the error, human or mechanical, that led to this tragedy.
You're absolutely right. And that's why it's so important that we not speculate. It could be the combination. That's why environmental factors and incidents that happen with aircraft also have an impact. We know that wasn't the case in this situation, but all of the investigation needs to cover the aircraft, the airline, i.e. the crew and their management of the aircraft, air traffic control. All of these aspects need to be considered. And now that we know that there was a Mayday, that opens up again the opportunity for more intelligence to make sure that we really do learn from this. But we need to be all so cautious to not speculate and then link speculation to past performance of whether it's the airline or the airline manufacturer.
And one person who will be under a huge amount of pressure and scrutiny is the CEO of Boeing. Am I right in thinking it's Kelly Ortberg, who's only been in the job for a year or so?
He's only been in the job in the year, but it's remarkable how he's lived a lifetime in it so far. Because when he walked into the job and he came into it out of retirement, having been ultimately a customer of Boeing in the past, so he knew the company well. He took it on knowing the challenges they were facing from a production level, from a reputational level, from a legal level, and at a financial level. So he really took on a worst case scenario, but he took it on with bravery. He took it on with absolute competence and confidence. And he was very clear, transparent, and compassionate about the challenges that were taking place with Boeing, not only outside in the marketplace and in the industry, but inside at a cultural level. So he's done some remarkable work, but he cannot build the airline up again, I beg your pardon, the manufacturer up again on his own. This is an entire Boeing community that needs to step forward. But in a situation like this, he, as a leader and a veteran in aviation, alongside Campbell Wilson, the CEO of Air India, who came from Singapore Airlines, another leader and veteran, this is a very powerful combination because both of them, whatever the source of the challenge was, whatever the problem is, and we find out where exactly the pilot called in the Mayday and for what reason, both Boeing and Airbus are going to grieve through this, and they will grieve together. We need to support the entire ecosystem around this situation, including, again, not just the people involved in the airline in AI 171, but the people in Ahmedabad who are now equally finding that lives have been lost and damage was severe in their hometown. And they are going to need to also be able to heal through this.
OK, well, thank you so much, Anita Menderata, for your expertise on this. Aviation expert, really appreciate your time going through all of that. Yes, CEO in the job for a year. Yeah. But
absolutely, the amount of reporting around Boeing over the last, well, since sort of 2018, 2019, some real big concerns there about the company. This will be another torrid day for them. But shall we return a little bit closer to home? Of course, as we keep saying, 53 British nationals on board this flight, sadly presumed dead. But we have, I believe, heard now from His Majesty the King. Cameron Walker, our royal correspondent, joins us in the studio.
Yeah, in the last few moments, the King has released the following statement. He says, "My wife and I have been desperately shocked by the terrible events in Ahmedabad this morning. Our special prayers and deepest possible sympathy are with the families and friends of all those affected by this appalling, tragic incident across so many nations as they await news of their loved ones. I would like to pay a particular tribute to the heroic efforts of the emergency services and all those providing help and support at this most heartbreaking and traumatic time. And he has signed that message, Charles R. Of course, 53 British citizens were on that aircraft, one Canadian citizen also on that aircraft, all subjects of King Charles III. Of course, India is also a Commonwealth country. The King is head of the Commonwealth. He's got a deep affection with that country. He's visited around 10 times over the course of his life as the Prince of Wales and King. He was there just last October, actually, for a private retreat. So he does go privately as well as publicly. So a message there from His Majesty the King just a few hours after this shocking incident.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Cameron, for bringing us that from His Majesty the King. As you say, he has been to India many a time. Did you say 10 times?
Around
and also
10
a more
times.
secret trip, sort of under the radar as well, too. So clearly a love for that country, perhaps.
Well, absolutely, yes. It was just after the Australia and Samoa tour where he flew from Samoa to a private retreat in India. Not, of course, this part of India. But I think we heard this morning that the King was being kept right up to date with the latest developments on this incident. And, of course, we have had it confirmed that 54 of his subjects were on that plane, 53 Brits, one Canadian as well as the wider Commonwealth, of course. It is His Majesty's government, it's His Majesty's Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office who will be liaising with the families back here in the United Kingdom. Of course, that plane was bound for London Gatwick.
OK, well, Cameron Walker, thank you very much indeed, our royal correspondent.
Now, our Home Security Editor, Mark White, just has a quick update for us.
Another important update from the police commissioner who's been speaking to members of the press in Ahmedabad, confirming that there have been fatalities on the ground now. He has not given a number, but confirming fatalities on the ground and saying that so far 25 people, local residents, have been taken to hospital with varying degrees of injury. So 25 injured, taken to hospital so far, and fatalities on the ground, in addition to the 242 who were on board this airliner.
OK, well, thank you very much indeed for that update. Mark White, our Home and Security Editor. Now, of course, there is other news around today, so we're going to get to your headlines and then we'll be back.
Well, thank you very much. Good afternoon to you. Let's get you up to date with the other stories in the GB newsroom. 3 teenagers have been charged following a third night of disorder in Northern Ireland. They have been charged with riot and criminal damage following scenes in Ballymena on Tuesday, and they will appear in court later. The violence continued on Wednesday and spread to other towns, including Larne, where a leisure centre providing emergency shelter for relocated families was attacked and set on fire. Authorities have described it as racist thuggery targeted at ethnic minorities and police officers. One man can clearly be seen throwing a machete towards security services. 32 officers were injured and 6 people arrested on the first 2 nights of violence. The Chancellor says she's disappointed after new figures show the UK economy shrank by 0.3% in April. The sharper-than-expected decline came a day after Rachel Reeves promised to boost growth in her spending review. Her plans included an extra £29 billion a year for the NHS in England and boosts for defence, education and housing, although some departments will see their budgets squeezed. Economists say tax rises will be almost inevitable in the autumn. And speaking to GB News, Rachel Reeves refused to rule out tax rises but defended her announcements.
To get the balance right between tax, spending and borrowing. And if you said yes to every request for more money, you'd end up in the same position that Liz Truss ended up in, which is crashing the economy, sending mortgage rates spiralling and causing the cost of living crisis that's done so much damage.
Well, Conservative Shadow Chancellor Mel Strides accused the Chancellor of economic vandalism, saying taxpayers will foot the bill for her renewed public spending.
Question that needs to be asked is, where is the money coming from? It's all very well to say you're spending all this cash left, right and centre. Well, the answer is it's coming by way of far higher taxes.
Meanwhile, the Beach Boys legend Brian Wilson has died at the age of 82. We're paying tribute this morning to him. Those are your headlines. I'll be back with more in half an hour's time.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 35 minutes past 1. My name's Tom Harwood. You're with Emily Carver as well, and we're giving you continued coverage on this tragedy that's unfurling in Ahmedabad on this flight that was due to land in Gatwick Airport in the United Kingdom later this evening.
Yes, it was. And at Gatwick, for us, is our reporter Adam Cherry. Adam, the plane was due to land at 6:25 today. Never made it, of course. What can you tell us?
That's right. Well, Gatwick Airport, of course, continues to be fully operational today, but they have released a statement this afternoon, and they say we can confirm flight AI-171 that was involved in an accident on departure from Ahmedabad Airport today was due to land at London Gatwick at 6:25 this evening. The aircraft had 242 passengers and crew members on board. London Gatwick is liaising closely with Air India, and a reception centre for relatives of those on board is being set up where information and support will be provided. Our thoughts are with family and friends of those on board. They say they will provide further updates and further information in due course, and of course we will provide that to you, our viewers on GB News, when we have it.
Yes, because, Adam, of course, there are a huge number of flights coming in and out of London to India, a standard flight, a huge British Indian population in this country who'll be making those flights semi-regularly or indeed regularly. There will be a lot of people who are potentially worried about taking their flight to India, whether it's on Air India, whether it's on a Boeing or the like. I imagine that some of the people there at Gatwick, some of the staff, will be trying to, make sure that their customers, the flyers, feel safe.
That's right, yeah. Speaking to people here today so far, and most passengers seem comfortable with flying nonetheless. But of course, you're right, there will be concerns about this and going forward, particularly as there's so much that we don't know yet. Why did this plane go down, and how can this be avoided in future? Because it is, of course, just so horrifying and so awful for all those involved. We've heard from the King, we've heard a statement from Prime Minister Keir Starmer as well, and Leader of the Opposition Kenny Badenoch, all sharing their thoughts. It is a horrible day, and you can feel it here today at Gatwick Airport.
Whenever a significant tragedy, significant aeroplane crash like this occurs, I mean, of course, people would still go out to fly. I'm due to take a flight on Sunday. I'm not going to change my plans, but it does make you think, sort of in the back of your mind, there must just be a greater sense of nervousness there today, Adam, where you are.
Yes, that's right. But like I said, everyone here is still boarding their flights and continuing business as usual. Like you said, Tom, you're going away this weekend. People aren't going to change their plans, but it's going to be in the back of your mind. Like I said, people are going to want to know why this happened and what can be done to stop it in future, because it's just so awful.
Yep. Well, thank you so much, Adam Cherry, there at Gatwick, where this plane was due to land at 6:25 this evening, but sadly it was not to be. We've learnt this afternoon that, according to local police, there appear to be no survivors from that horrendous plane crash. But here in the studio, bringing us the very latest, and throughout the morning and throughout this afternoon, is our Home and Security editor, Mark White. Yes, that confirmation that no one's managed to survive this horrific incident, and that we may well see further fatalities on the ground too. Is that right, Mark?
Well, without a doubt, the police commissioner who brought us that news of no survivors on the airline are also saying that there have been fatalities. So far, 25 injured people, people who were on the ground, have been taken to area hospitals. Now, the aircraft, we're told, crashed into the residential quarters of the BJ Medical college, with doctors from this area living in quarters there. Apparently, there were some 94 flats and about 200 people living in them. And we know from reports that a significant number of doctors were in the canteen having lunch at the time. I think it was about 1:30 in the afternoon local time when this aircraft came down. And from the pictures that we could see, there were some still images earlier that we showed, where you could see the tables in this sort of dining hall. And they appeared mostly to be intact. Some of that aircraft had embedded in the side of the building and caused damage there. But I think for the most part in that area of this residential complex, people may have been a bit luckier. But we know from other images we've been showing you, there is devastating damage to a lot of the apartment blocks. And we're just seeing some of those sort of images now where apartment blocks have effectively been burnt out. Some others demolished, cars on the ground as well that have been badly damaged and burnt out, as we can see on these images there. So right next to the cars, you can see some of the residential blocks that have been really quite badly affected. Now, the hope will be that at this time of the day, that lots of people might have been away at work. But as we know, especially in the medical profession, people work shifts. So there will have been people at home as well, either having lunch or perhaps sleeping because they've done a night shift. So there'll be a mix of people.
Yeah, well, Mark White, thanks indeed for bringing us that very latest. But let's speak now to an aviation safety investigator, David Gleave, because I think the question on everyone's minds now will be, well, the investigation surely must start. How long might it take?
Well, I wouldn't expect the official report to be finished for up to 2 years. However, there will be updates to industry well before that, so that any necessary measures that are identified very early are implemented very, very quickly indeed. So I would guess 2 years for the report, but the first stream of information may well start within a week and certainly within a month.
And I suppose one of the things about this investigation is that we've seen the tail of this aeroplane lodged in a building that seems to have been reported to be this hostel of sorts for medical students. But that tail of the aeroplane looks like it is fairly intact. Would that suggest that the black box is readily achievable?
It should be. I haven't seen the front end of the tail. I've only seen the rear end of the tail sticking out, so I can't say whether the part that the black boxes are attached to is with that. However, this is a relatively low-speed accident, so the boxes should be basically undamaged in terms of their physical structure. They will have been subjected quite possibly to a fire, but they're fire resistant for many minutes, so that there should be no problem in terms of once that they have been found, then downloading the data from there. So I'm hopeful that they'll be able to identify them and access them very quickly.
Because this will be, I suppose, what most of the families are thinking about. I mean, how on earth could this have happened? What can we say at this stage? There must be a number of possibilities, of course, but what are the leading theories about how something like this, in what is an aircraft that is reputed to be quite so safe, quite so reliable, how could something like this happen?
There can be all sorts of external things to the flight crew and the maintenance and the design of the aeroplane. You could have had a large bird strike. Indian airports are known to have large birds in the vicinity of the airport. So much like you saw Captain Sully sort of splash down in the River Hudson after a multiple bird strike, it could be related to that. The weather seems to be fairly reasonable, so I don't think it's related to monsoon winds, rains, or sort of wind shifts and thunderstorms. After that, it's then a question of where on the runway did the aeroplane start its takeoff roll, and did it have enough power? Was the weight distribution okay within the aeroplane, and the takeoff weight absolutely fine? And then after that, were there any onboard failures? So there's a whole host of options available at the moment, and these will all be opened up in parallel by the investigators, and then they will start to close them down as they see that it's not particularly relevant. They'll just document that for the final report and then start their focus on the things that they believe are related to the causes.
That people have commented a lot online. Sort of former pilots that we've spoken to on this programme have looked at the remarkable footage of this aeroplane as it was coming into land, saying that the landing gear, as it was taking off, that the landing gear was down when it ordinarily wouldn't have been, and that the flaps were in a very unusual position for this point in the takeoff. Have you seen those reports? Have you seen that footage? And what does that suggest to you?
Well, I've seen the video footage, and I've seen enough video footage to know that actually it's quite difficult, I mean, certainly the low resolutions I've seen it, to actually establish whether the very low flap settings that you can use on takeoff were actually deployed or not. So I'm a little hesitant. It's a bit more obvious when the landing flap is deployed, because the landing flap is pointing much more downwards. For takeoff flap, it tends to move backwards before it curls around and moves down. So I'm not going by anything like that. In the event that you believe, and there was a Mayday call, or at least reported in the media, there's been a Mayday call. After a Mayday call, if you believe the aeroplane is going to go down and impact the ground somewhere, it's quite reasonable to deploy the undercarriage at that point. If the undercarriage hasn't been retracted, the 787, some takeoffs, the 787, they do leave the undercarriage down for a reasonable period of time. So it's not that unusual for a 787 to have its undercarriage down at that point. Certainly, one in every few hundred, maybe 1,000 flights or so, has the undercarriage left down for the first couple of minutes. So I'm not reading anything into that. It could be a crew action where they've deliberately decided to keep the gear down, or alternatively, they've lowered the gear again in anticipation of impact.
OK, and David, there haven't been any issues with this model, have there? This Boeing 787. There have been with the 737. What is the difference between these types of models and the issues that potentially there could be?
Well, the 737 is a modification of a design that was made back in the 1960s. The 787 is a brand new 20th century design aeroplane using modern materials. It's lots of computers on board to help you and lots of safety systems built into it. I can't find any correlation here between the 737 recent MAX accidents and this. I think that any correlation there would be spurious. So I think that the 787 is a fantastic aeroplane. It did have some problems at the start with the design and batteries and various other things, but nevertheless, there's a great number of safety systems to warn you if you don't have the flaps in the right setting, and all sorts of things like that. So it's a very safe aeroplane. There have been issues with Boeing build quality with it, but I think that's far more to do with maintenance and its overall appearance rather than its operational deployment, rather than its safety capability.
Yeah, David, just for our viewers and listeners, we're currently looking at live pictures from Ahmedabad where you can see two buildings looking like flat accommodation seemingly burnt out. There's been a huge amount of devastation. Of course, many people losing their lives on board that plane, but we're expecting more fatalities on the ground as well, as we witness and we understand more of the damage that has been done and potential fatalities. At least 50 medical students, we're hearing, have been taken to hospital. Some of these buildings being used as a hostel for some of those medical students. Parts of the plane have been seen scattered around the crash site. Locals, as well as the authorities, clearly visible to them. This is astonishing, the scale of this disaster, David, only moments into the flight.
Yes, it's most unfortunate, and there's a lot of lessons to learn for third-party risk management around airports. There's a lot of places wouldn't let you build blocks of flats and things like that directly under the flight path, precisely for this reason. And it's utterly tragic that it's hit medical students. I mean, it couldn't be any worse than that you would call on all available medical resources. And now we have this tragedy and possibly multiple deaths amongst the medical community on the ground as well. So there are general planning provisions to say don't put hospitals and hotels and large accommodation blocks directly underneath the flight path within this distance of the airport, in case you have this type of takeoff and crash or a landing accident in the vicinity of the runway.
Well, David Gleave, thanks so much for being with us here and for offering your expertise on what we do know so far on this terrible incident. Aviation safety investigator David Gleave, thanks for your time.
OK, well, we should also say that the Foreign Office has issued a number for any concerned Brits to call, and we have that for you on the screen now. It is 0207 008 5000, so that's 0207 008 5000 as well. So you can call that if you are concerned potentially about a relative or a friend who might have been in the area or on board that plane. You can get in touch with the Foreign Office.
Well, joining us now is the aviation journalist Josh Cahill, because, Josh, I have lost count of the number of recent aeroplane crashes that we have sadly had to report on this channel. It does seem that 2025 is a big year, a bad year for the aviation sector.
It seems like it, and especially with a crash like today, which is very unusual, given that the 787 Dreamliner has a great reputation in terms of safety. Air India is operating hundreds of flights every day. They're also known to be a very reliable and safe airline. And yes, you're right. It seems to the public eye that these incidents are on the rise, especially with social media. As you can see, as soon as a plane crashes, as this one, content is getting shared all over social media. And then people speculate about the course, what could have happened. And this is the situation that we're finding ourselves in.
And Josh, Boeing itself has received quite a bit of reputational damage in recent years, hasn't it?
It does. It's very important to point out that the 787 is not related to the 737 MAX, which is known to be a troubled airplane. And the Dreamliner, as a new generation plane, has a great reputation. So this will obviously raise new questions. There have been whistleblowers in the past who have said that there are design flaws, that there are issues with the 787 Dreamliner. But on the contrary, the Boeing 787 was operating very reliable with airlines in the past until today. So it will be very interesting to see what Boeing has to say and what the actual cause of this accident was. If it's a pilot error, then obviously Boeing is not to blame. But the question is there, why does it happen to Boeing again?
I mean, it does seem like it is a particularly tough time, given that the share price of Boeing seems to have collapsed by at least 7% over the course of the morning. Of course, this pre-trading in the United States. But this is a significant blow, not just to Boeing as a company, but to the industry as a whole.
That is true. I mean, this is what the passenger looks for. They want to have a peace of mind. They don't want to be confronted with news like this. And we were always believing until today that the new generation aircraft, whether it's an Airbus A350, which is the counterpart to Boeing, or now we have Chinese planes joining the market as well. And for the first time, we have a new generation plane that is in trouble. Boeing is also working on the release of the 777X, which was supposed to be introduced to the market in 2018. Once again, a new generation plane, but it has been delayed for over 5 years due to all the issues and troubles Boeing is running into. So, yes.
And Josh, this was a very experienced, highly experienced pilot. He's been named as Captain Sumit Sabharwal and his co-pilot Clive Kundar. 8,000 odd hours in the air. This captain had been, his co-pilot also quite experienced, reasonably experienced for a co-pilot too. The flight was scheduled to be 9 hours, 50 minutes. It was a non-stop journey to Gatwick. Took off in the morning as normal, 242 people on board. Less than a minute or so later, hitting the ground. As you say, many people will speculate over exactly what happened. But this is just such a short trajectory for this flight. It's just astonishing.
Something must have gone terribly wrong, definitely. The pilots are very experienced. As you said, the captain has over 8,000 flying hours, and they are well trained. They're very well trained. It doesn't matter whether you're a pilot flying for British Airways or India. The standards are very much the same. And usually in those cases, if it's true that a distress signal or a Mayday was received from the pilots, they must have been in a very dire situation, because communication is the very last bit that you focus on as a pilot, because you're more focused on solving the problem. But it seems like that the pilots perhaps weren't able to figure out what happened. Everything must have happened in a very short amount of time. People are speculating about engine failure, about technical issues, God knows, but that there was a Mayday distress call suggests that the pilots perhaps didn't know what were going on. Maybe there was interference from outside, technical issues. For now, it's a lot of speculation, but it's very rare that you have pilots still sending out a Mayday signal before they crash in a situation like this, because they're trying to recover the plane, which they eventually failed to do so.
OK, well, Josh Kyle, thank you very much indeed for joining us today. Aviation journalist, thank you for your expertise. We are going to take a quick break. Heard no survivors from this plane crash. We're going to bring you more updates as and when they come, so do stick with us here on Good Afternoon Britain.
£54,321 in totally tax-free cash could make your year the best yet. How would you react if you got that winning call?
Oh my God, I'm going to cry. Oh my God. Thank you.
You weren't expecting to get that call today, were you?
No, I wasn't.
For a chance to win £54,321 cash, text cash to 63225. One entry costs £2.50 plus one standard network rate message. Or text bonus to 63225. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start at £2.50. Call 0903 686 3232. Calls cost £2.50 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB14 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 4 p.m. on the 1st of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
From the school run to the home run, watch a new show for all of Britain.
He can say whatever he wants.
A straight-talking show where all voices are heard.
And, you know, when are we going to stop talking about smashing the gangs and actually do it?
With the stories that matter from every part of our country.
There's a bit of a crash landing there for your Chancellor.
Bold, fearless and standing up for you. That's me, Martin Daubney, 3 p.m. till 6 p.m, weekdays, here only on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation, isn't it? Because the failure is...
You're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back.
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
And we do not shy away from the difficult stuff. Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood. So join me on Jubes & Co. weeknights at 6 p.m, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
No matter the state it's in, this is our nation. Join me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, for a genuine, honest discussion on where we have been, where we are going, and where we are with the people who set the direction. That's State of the Nation every Monday and Tuesday at 8 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Well, good afternoon, Britain. It is now 2 o'clock on Thursday, the 12th of June, and bringing you the major breaking news this afternoon. Air India flight bound for London carrying 242 passengers, including 53 Brits, has crashed shortly after takeoff in India, with local police saying there are now no survivors. Let's go straight to Tom, who has the latest.
Yes, Emily, here's what we know so far. Flight AI-171, a Boeing 787-8 Dreamliner, was due to fly from Ahmedabad to London Gatwick. Well, the flight crashed 5 minutes after takeoff at 1:38 p.m. local time. That's 9:08 a.m. BST. Well, this is the first crash of a Boeing 787 Dreamliner since its introduction in 2011. Up to now, it's had an impeccable safety record as an aeroplane. It's been flown by many airlines in Britain, including British Airways, Virgin Atlantic and TUI Airways. Well, a flight crew made a Mayday call to air traffic control shortly after taking off, losing contact at just 625 feet in the air. On board were 742 souls, 230 passengers, 2 pilots and 10 cabin crew. Of those, 169 were Indian, 53 British, 1 Canadian and 7 Portuguese. And as Emily just highlighted, police in India have now said there were no survivors. We'll have the very latest on this crash and what we know so far after your headlines with Aaron Armstrong.
Very good afternoon to you. Let's get you up to date with the news away from the India plane crash. Rioters armed with petrol bombs have clashed with police after a third night of race-related violence in County Antrim. The focus of the disorder was again in the town of Ballymena, but the violence spread elsewhere, including to Larne, where a leisure centre providing emergency shelter for relocated families was attacked and set on fire. 3 teenagers have appeared in court, charged with rioting offences. Authorities have described it as racist thuggery targeted at ethnic minorities and police officers. One man here clearly seen throwing a machete towards security services. Now, rioting erupted on Monday after a vigil for a teenage girl who was allegedly assaulted by 2 14-year-old boys. The pair have appeared in court, where the charges were read to them by a Romanian interpreter. Deputy First Minister Emma Little-Pengelly says the government's working to reassure the local community.
No woman or girl walking about should feel fearful. We've got our Ending Violence Against Women and Girls strategy, and of course we've got a number of schemes running. We're working with the PSNI, we're working with local councils to tackle the scourge of that misogyny, of that violence against women and girls. So we want to reassure everyone that we are working hard to try to ensure that everybody remains safe. But we are listening to those concerns. We must listen to those concerns, and we need to stamp out that violence against women and girls.
The Institute for Fiscal Studies says Rachel Reeves is a gnat's whisker away from having to raise taxes in the autumn. The Chancellor set out the government's programme for investment and public sector spending for the next 3 years yesterday, unveiling more funding for the NHS, defence, education and housing. However, the IFS Director Paul Johnson believes the figures for projected government efficiencies aren't credible and says Ms Reeves' suggestions that the economic outlook has improved over the past year are not true. Mr Johnson also predicted the government will end up spending more over the next 3 years than outlined in yesterday's plans. The Resolution Foundation think tank says Britain's morphing into a national health state because the NHS will take up half of all day-to-day public spending by the end of the decade. Now, the Conservatives have described yesterday's spending review as a fantasy, which will lead to further tax rises, but the Chancellor has dismissed the criticism.
Taxes won't need to go up to pay for what is in this spending review. Now, I'm not going to write 4 years' worth of budgets within the first year of this government, but we took the action that was necessary last year to put our public finances on a firm footing and put that immediate injection of cash into our public services. And we've allocated the funding for day-to-day spending for the next 3 years and for capital spending for the remainder of this Parliament.
The Conservative Shadow Chancellor, Samel Stride, has accused Rachel Reeves of economic vandalism, saying taxpayers will foot the bill.
The answer is it's coming by way of far higher taxes, particularly on businesses, and that is destroying growth. It has also come by way of huge levels of additional borrowing, which has been inflationary, which has been interest rates have been higher for longer, our national debt growing, and the servicing costs of that debt, because of the higher interest rates, now running at £100 billion per year. That's twice what we spend on defence, and that's leaving us overall in a very fragile position with a lot of challenges ahead, and a lot of people worried now that we're going to be looking at potentially very significant further tax rises in the autumn.
Now, the US is scaling back its embassy staff in Iraq as well as from military bases in the region over heightened security threats. It comes over fears of reprisals amid reports Israel's preparing to attack Iran's nuclear programme without US support. Diplomatic staff will leave Baghdad along with a partial withdrawal of staff from bases in Kuwait and Bahrain. It has been announced by President Trump, who says he's less confident now that negotiations with Iran will succeed. He's repeatedly threatened to strike Iran if those talks fail. A curfew's been in place for a second night in Los Angeles amid hundreds of arrests as protests against Donald Trump's immigration raids continue. The sixth day of demonstrations have been largely peaceful, but there have been sporadic outbreaks of violence. Nearly 400 people have been arrested in LA since protests began on Friday, most of them undocumented migrants. The governor of California, Gavin Newsom, says President Trump has escalated the tensions with an unnecessary and illegal deployment of federal troops. Democrats nationally have condemned his actions as authoritarian. And the White House is reviewing a multi-billion-dollar submarine deal signed with the UK and Australia. Washington wants to make sure it's aligned with President Trump's America First agenda. The AUKUS Pact would provide Australia with its first nuclear submarines. It's widely been seen as a response to the threat of China. Australia's Defence Minister, though, says he's confident the pact will succeed. And one of the world's most active volcanoes is erupting again. Kilauea on Hawaii's Big Island has been spewing fountains of lava more than 330 feet in the air. It's the latest event in an eruption which started nearly 6 months ago. Scientists at the US Geological Survey's Hawaiian Volcano Observatory say the fountains could climb even higher as the activity intensifies. There's your headlines. I'll be back with more at 2:30.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is 7 minutes past 2 and we're delivering continued coverage of this terrible crash of this Air India flight over in Ahmedabad. With us in the studio is Mark White, who can bring us the very latest.
Well, the police commissioner, who's been speaking quite regularly to reporters over in Ahmedabad, has said that 204 bodies have been recovered from the scene so far. And he believes that may be a mix of people who were on board the aircraft and those who were potentially on the ground and caught up in this as well. Earlier, he'd said that 25 injured people had been taken to area hospitals. Well, we're now hearing from the Federation of All India Medical Association. And remember that this aircraft came down at least partly on a complex accommodation blocks for medical students. They are now confirming, according to the Reuters news agency, that up to 60 students studying medicine, so 60 medical students, were taken to hospital. They're also saying that at least 5 medical students are still missing. 2 are in the intensive care unit. And also relatives of some doctors are also missing. So that's their reports. And that obviously doesn't talk really to the sort of potential wider people in the community that are not resident in those sort of medical doctors' accommodation blocks. But that a very worrying report coming from that equivalent to the British Medical Association here, basically the Federation of All India Medical Association, confirming that up to 60 medical students have been taken to hospital with varying degrees of injuries. Some of them, at least 2 according to this report, are in the intensive care unit. Others are missing and family members are missing as well.
And do we know just how far that building was that was housing medical students from the actual runway itself, from the airport?
Well, there's some reports suggested that this impact site was 15 kilometres away from the airport. That might be true, but certainly 5 or 6 kilometres away from the airport anyway. So we're not that far from the perimeter of this airport. So as I say, I think the significant line out of that latest update to reporters across in Ahmedabad is the fact that 204 bodies, according to the police commissioner, have now been recovered from the scene, but there are clearly many injured, and among them at least 60 medical students.
Well, Mark White, thanks for that very latest update there. Let's now speak to the journalist Sweta Ranjan. Sweta, thanks so much for being with us, because this is a terrible, terrible tragedy. And we're starting to piece together a bit more of what it's actually like on the ground.
Yeah, first of all, I would like to share that it is deeply a distressing moment currently. And my sincere condolences goes to the family and all those who were on board. As a journalist who has closely followed aviation, I would say it is a very, very tragic accident. But as we all have been speculating what could be the reason, because Mayday was called, but my observation here goes on to because the way the videos that we are seeing, the way the aeroplane took off and the way it sunk, my observation goes on to say it could be, it has to be a dual engine failure or a serious overloading issue. Because in these two situations only, the aircraft sinks like this. And it could be, because of either of the reasons, the airplane lost the thrust or the energy. So my observation goes like this.
Okay, and it's been commented that these two pilots were experienced, the pilot and the co-pilot. Of course, there could have been an absolutely devastating mistake, error made by either one of them that led to this plane crash. There's also been a lot made of the wing flaps and what role they could have played in this disaster, played in this crash. To see this flight go down so quickly after taking off, carrying so many people. What's the very latest that we're hearing from Indian politicians? How are they reacting to this?
Indian politicians, of course, all of them are taking onto the social media, and of course, our Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji has instructed our Home Minister Amit Shah ji and also the Aviation Minister. They have been instructed to reach the ground and note their observations and take necessary actions. And of course, as in this accident, we have lost one of the reputed leaders from Gujarat, who had also been the Chief Minister of Gujarat. So he was supposed to return from London on 30th of June. So he was also traveling, and losing him is a great loss, big loss to the country. And all people, even the officials of DGCA, Directorate General of Civil Aviation, or whosoever is required to take the actions, they are working on it. People, those who have been affected, fatalities, have been rushed to the hospital. And all passengers we have lost, we cannot bring them back. It is a tragic accident, but all necessary arrangements are being made to, approach the family members. Their names have been released, and all people who have been affected are being rushed to the hospitals.
It is such a Such a big story in this country, undoubtedly such a huge story in India as well. I was reading this is the worst airline disaster in India since the bombing of an Air India flight back in 1985. I mean, it's an entire lifetime ago that India suffered such a significant tragedy in the air. But Sweta Ranjan, thanks so much for bringing us up to date there on everything going on in India right now.
OK,
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed. We're going to head to Downing Street now to speak to GB News political editor Christopher Hope for more political reaction. Christopher, we've heard from the Foreign Secretary, we've heard from the Prime Minister, we've heard from Kemi Badenoch, we've heard from Sadiq Khan too. Christopher, what have they had to say?
Well, that's right. To recap for viewers and listeners who may have missed that, of course, this is a deeply sombre place, Downing Street, today after the events in Ahmedabad. Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, he said that scenes emerging of a London-bound plane carrying many British nationals crashing in Ahmedabad are devastating, he says. He's been kept updated as the situation develops, and his thoughts are with the passengers and families at this deeply distressing time. Earlier, David Lammy, he spoke to MPs in the Houses of Parliament. Commons is still sitting, of course. He says his thoughts are with and those of the entire House are with those affected by the tragic plane crash. The Foreign Office is working urgently with local authorities to support British nationals and their families. And here's what David Lammy told MPs.
Well, Mr. Speaker, my thoughts, and I'm sure those of the entire House, are with those who've been affected by the tragic plane crash in India this morning. We know that British nationals were on board, and Mr. Speaker, I can confirm that the FCDO is working urgently with local authorities to support British nationals and their families, and has stood up a crisis team in both Delhi and in London.
Now, Kemi Badenoch, the Tory leader, she said that her thoughts are with all those affected, especially the families of those on board and the emergency teams responding to what appears to be a horrifying tragedy. Many of these remarks, of course, made before we had the full scale, the fact that all of those on board the plane were killed. Heidi Alexander, she's the Transport Secretary. She says she's deeply saddened. Her thoughts and sympathies are with those affected, and she's receiving regular updates on this emerging situation. Right now, in terms of government, this is a Foreign Office lead, but it might well move towards the Department for Transport when it comes to working out what happened. There are options open. We're not there yet. It could be that UK Air Action investigators fly to Ahmedabad to support the effort there of investigators to find out what went wrong, and it's vital that the cause of this is determined ASAP, given how many flights are taking off globally, and of course there's an issue of repatriation of the bodies. And also, just finally, Nigel Farage, the leader of Reform UK, who experienced a devastating light aircraft plane crash back in 2010, he had this to say earlier today.
As somebody who survived the plane crash myself, only just, when I see incidents like this crash, I shudder. And I say to myself that really, if you think about it, from the moment of conception to death, luck is the biggest factor in our lives. Doesn't matter how good we are, how bad we are, bad things can happen. So you know what? Live each day as if it were thy last.
There you have Nigel Farage, live each day as if it were your last. Appropriate remarks, I think, given what happened here. People were on a plane flying back to Gatwick. Suddenly, it's all over for them. Deeply, deeply distressing for families and anyone affected.
Absolutely. Christopher Hope, thank you very much indeed for bringing us that from outside Downing Street. The very latest political reaction, of course, we're bringing you here in the United Kingdom as well as from India, and we'll be speaking to experts throughout the show as well. We're going to take a quick break and then we'll be back very shortly.
Westminster, the ultimate clique. And you're fighting like rats in a sack. But here on the Camilla Tominey Show, we ask the questions the establishment media is too scared to ask. OK, let me ask you a straight question, because I know you're a straight-talking politician. Whether it's net zero, illegal immigration or law and order, nothing is off-limits.
You had the power then.
Yeah, as I
And
say,
now you've lost it. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show that's fearless.
No, let me finish my question if you don't mind, because it is my show.
Sundays at 9:30, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Britain's newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
Well, we have found some peacocks, so we've been speaking to people today, hearing from them how much of a nuisance they say they are. It is a real mix, though, here. Some people saying that actually they're all right, they're part of the furniture of this village now. You can see this peacock here showing all of its feathers. I'm going to be very honest with you, we have just seen it attempt to mate the peahen that you can see behind it there. And this showing of feathers is part of the thing, what they do to try, part of the mating call here as well, to try and show all of the feathers off and everything like that. And there's a thing that they do, train rattling as well. I wonder if Mr. Peacock might talk to us. Mr. Peacock, would you?
Come on, Jack. Come on, Jack. We need you to get involved.
Not sure. GB News, Jack
This is your big David Attenborough moment, Jack.
Any questions to say to the nuisance you might be causing people? Any response?
Although this feels a little bit intimate now, if there's a bit of a moment going on. It's all got a bit voyeuristic.
Very happy to talk to us so far this morning, but some residents of Tutbury here have spoken to us this morning. Take a listen to what they've told us about what they think about all these peacocks.
They've been here longer than I have, so I've lived in the house I live in at the top here 47 years. They've been there all that time, because they were from the castle to start with. The people at the castle used to have them. And they're just part of the village.
I hate them. When they do all that damage, it's heartbreaking, you know. Yeah, round them up and take them to a farm or a zoo, where they're supposed to be.
They're like the furniture. They should stay around here, you know. People just need to let them get on with what they are. They're nature's animals and they deserve to live around here, don't they?
GB News, the People's Channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your-say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 22 minutes past 2. Now, all day we've been bringing you the news of this tragic crash, a Gatwick-bound flight crashing in Ahmedabad in Western India. Well, we are hearing more and more about what this means and, indeed, those involved, what they're all saying. Let's head straight to Gatwick, where the plane was, of course, due to land this evening at 6:25 in the evening. Our reporter, Adam Cherry, is there all day for us, because, Adam, we're now hearing from Gatwick.
We are, yes. In the last hour, we've had a statement from the Chief Executive of Gatwick Airport. This is what Stuart Wingate had to say in the last hour. We are very saddened to hear about today's accident involving Air India flight AI-171, and our thoughts are with the family and friends of those on board. We can confirm that flight AI-171 that was involved in an accident shortly after departure from Ahmedabad Airport today was due to land here at Gatwick Airport at 6:25 this evening. London Gatwick is liaising closely with Air India, and a reception centre for relatives of those on board is being set up where information and support will be provided. They also said the airport typically has around 12 weekly Air India departures from here at Gatwick, including 5 weekly departures from Ahmedabad. They're going to be providing more updates throughout the course of the day, and of course we will bring them to you as we get them.
I've got to say it does produce a sense of foreboding, perhaps, that we've seen quite so many plane crashes over the course of the last 6 or 12 months. It seems like we report them more and more and more, even if the data still suggests flying is very safe. There must be a sort of sense of trepidation there at Gatwick Airport.
A little bit, I suppose. Like I said to you in the last hour, it's still very busy here. It's sort of business as usual. Of course, if you talk to people, there's shock and trepidation, as you would expect. But that isn't putting people off flying. Of course, these flights will continue. And like I said, today is, in other respects, a routine day here at Gatwick, despite, as you say, Tom, the seemingly increasing presence of these incidents over the last 12 to 18 months.
OK, well, Adam Cherry, thank you very much indeed for being there at Gatwick Airport for us, our reporter there from Gatwick Airport, where this plane was due to land. So we know quite a bit now from this tragic incident. 53 Britons were on board this plane. Sadly, all have perished, according to the local police there in India. Bodies are being recovered. 204, last count, have been recovered from the crash. And this all happened within 2 minutes or so of the plane taking off. A truly tragic event. We don't know yet if this was down to human error, some kind of technological failure on board, waiting to, of course, recover the black box, which will tell us lots of the answers, won't it, Tom? But hearing from people, nonetheless, on what perhaps we can see from the footage that we've seen already, which we've seen very close footage to what happened.
Absolutely, and it does seem that the rear of the plane was actually relatively intact, lodged in a building. Clearly, the plane split apart. The tail looks relatively intact. The rest of the plane, well, we haven't seen images of it. It's seemingly sort of lodged in buildings, demolished itself, and clearly, as the police are saying, no survivors. So the front and middle sections of the plane completely gone, but that back portion, importantly, holding what's known as the black box, which should tell us more about the final moments of this flight.
Absolutely. Well, shall we speak to journalist Vineet Malik, who's with us now? Vineet, truly shocking story that we're learning more and more about, hearing that unfortunately, there are no survivors from this plane crash. Also hearing now that there could be fatalities on the ground as well. We're looking at footage here of the massive smoke plumes, black smoke, fireball, as well as that plane crashed to the ground. Vineet, what can you tell us?
Yeah, so this is a really tragic incident that happened in India today. So this happened in Ahmedabad city in western India, wherein Air India flight, Boeing 787-8, bound for London Gatwick, crashed in Ahmedabad city at around 13:39 hours Indian Standard Time. And this flight crashed within just 5 minutes after takeoff. There were around 242 passengers on board. As per reports received from Air India, there were 169 Indian nationals, 53 British nationals, 7 Portuguese and 1 Canadian national as well. So there isn't any accurate update on reported survivors as of now. However, we are keeping a tab on Air India, tweet handles, and also the Director General of Civil Aviation India Twitter handles. So, as per reports received from Air India, this is really a shocking incident. Because as far as I remember, the last incident happened in 2020, wherein Air India Express, it's basically a budget airline of Air India. This crashed in South India, wherein the plane overshot, and there were around 110 fatalities in 2020. So after that incident, so this is the second one after 2020. And ironically, Air India has blacked out its display picture on its social media platforms all across. It is indeed a sad incident. And as of now, we are keeping a tab on all the social media platforms. And we're also in touch with DGCA India and also Air India hotline. Yes.
No, and it is clearly something that is just so shocking to see, particularly because this is a populous area. I mean, we've seen hundreds of people on our screens around the around the crash site, no doubt thousands, tens of thousands in the immediate vicinity. So much video that we have been able to see of the aftermath, and even video of the final moments of the plane too. We truly are in a sort of 21st century world when it comes to these incidents, that perhaps before we wouldn't have such an amount of evidence, an amount of video to comment upon. But I am slightly taken aback by the sheer volume of content that we're looking at now, Vineet.
Yes, so it is really tragic. Yes, indeed. So everybody, not only from the civil aviation industry, but from all walks of life, people are really shocked, because such incidents do not happen every now and then. And however, we are still trying to ascertain all the details from the airline and also from the DGCA India. What could be the reason behind this mishap? People are still trying to, know the truth. But as of now, we have not received more details on this. It is really shocking, and we're just trying to come up with this incident as of now.
Okay.
And
OK,
yes.
well, Vineet, Malik, really appreciate your time. Thank you very much indeed for joining us to discuss this horrific incident from today. So, yes, we know that this Boeing 787 was carrying 240 passengers and no survivors. We know that it crashed into a residential area near the airport, hitting a doctor's hostel. We know that many people from that hostel, many of those medics, have been taken to a nearby hospital. We know that 53 Brits were on board, many more Indian nationals, some Portuguese and one Canadian. And we've all seen by now on this channel the horrific footage of that aircraft crashing to the ground there. Huge plumes of smoke and fire.
Absolutely. We're learning more about this crash all the time. We're getting more statements from authorities both in this country and in India. We'll be right back with you with the very latest on this horrific crash involving 53 Britons travelling on that Air India flight. We'll bring you the latest after your other news is rounded up by Tatiana Sanchez.
Tom, thank you very much. Yes, of course, then some other news. Today, 3 teenagers have been charged with riot offences following a third night of disorder in Northern Ireland. The disorder largely took place in Ballymena, but violence has spread to other towns, including Larne, where a leisure centre providing emergency shelter for relocated families was attacked and set on fire. Authorities have described it as racist thuggery targeted at ethnic minorities and police officers. One man is clearly seen throwing a machete towards security services. 32 officers were injured in this and 6 people arrested on the first 2 nights of that violence. The Chancellor says she is disappointed after new figures show the UK economy shrank by 0.3% in April. The sharper-than-expected decline comes a day after Rachel Reeves promised to boost growth in her spending review. Her plans included an extra £29 billion a year for the NHS in England and boosts for defence, education and housing, although some departments will see their budgets squeezed. Economists say tax rises will be almost inevitable in the autumn. Rachel Reeves, though, has defended her announcements.
Have to get the balance right between tax, spending and borrowing. And if you said yes to every request for more money, you'd end up in the same position that Liz Truss ended up in, which is crashing the economy, sending mortgage rates spiralling and causing the cost of living crisis that's done so much damage.
Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride has accused the Chancellor of economic vandalism, saying taxpayers will foot the bill for her renewed public spending.
Question that needs to be asked is, where is the money coming from? It's all very well to say you're spending all this cash left, right and centre. Well, the answer is it's coming by way of far higher taxes.
And one of the world's most active volcanoes is erupting again. Kilauea on Hawaii's Big Island has been spewing fountains of lava more than 330 feet in the air. It's the latest event in an eruption which started almost 6 months ago. Scientists with the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory say the fountains could climb even higher as the activity intensifies. And those are the latest GB News headlines. For now, more news from me in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Done.
My Claim Group sponsors the GB News Finance Report.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.3618 and €1.1729. The price of gold is £2,489.10 per ounce, and the FTSE 100 is currently at 8,879 points. Done.
My Claim Group sponsors the GB News Finance Report.
Welcome along to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Some heavy downpours across western areas today. We do have Met Office yellow weather warnings in place. Much of the east, though, staying dry and with some pretty warm, humid, hazy sunshine. Low pressure sitting west. That's why we've got most of the rain here, but it's wafting the air up from the south. That's why it's warm and that's why it's quite humid. We've already had some pretty heavy downpours over southwest England, spreading more widely now to Wales. A soggy afternoon here and some hefty downpours too for Northern Ireland. A lot of spray, a lot of surface water on the roads. Some showery rain getting into parts of the Midlands, Northern England too, but a good chunk of southern eastern England, much of Scotland staying dry. Quite warm and humid, temperatures in the mid-20s with some sunshine. A little cooler on the east coast, so there's quite a keen wind blowing out there, so quite a strange feeling with it being humid but also quite gusty. The wind's easing across the southeast and East Anglia though. Fine conditions generally here through this evening. Some heavy downpours though returning to Wales, potential for further thunderstorms here. And it stays pretty wet through the evening rush hour across Northern Ireland. So again, potential for some disruption. That rain creeping into southern Scotland. Most of Scotland still dry at this stage, but that won't last. We'll see the rain working its way into southern Scotland and western Scotland through the night. Not as intense, but still some heavy rain likely, particularly in southwest Scotland for a time this evening. A few showers following to Wales and southwest England, but many parts of the Midlands and eastern England having a dry night with clear skies. And those winds in the east will certainly ease down. It will be a warm night. Look at these numbers. Temperatures in towns and cities staying in the mid-teens, so quite a humid feel for Friday. Now, again, a good part of the country will be dry and sunny for most of the day. Quite a bit of cloud in the west. A few showers here initially, but look down to the south. Some angry-looking rain heading northwards. Some more thunderstorms drifting north later on Friday, particularly across East Anglia and the southeast, but then becoming more widespread. Could also cause some disruption.
Crash Law 24 sponsors GB News Traffic and Travel Report.
Good afternoon. This is the latest AI travel news from gbnews.com. The M8 is closed eastbound at junction 26 due to a vehicle fire, with motorists advised to find alternative routes. In Swindon, the A419 northbound between the junctions with the A420 and the A361 is experiencing delays following a police incident with one of two lanes closed. On the trains, Great Western Railway services face disruptions between Exeter St David's and Okehampton. ScotRail services have delays between Helensburgh Upper and Oban Mallaig. Stay up to date for more travel news. Go to gbnews.com.
Crash Law 24 sponsors GB News Traffic and Travel Report.
Well, good afternoon, Britain. It is now 2:38. You're with me, Emily Carver, and Tom Harwood. Now we're going to turn straight to Mark White, a Home and Security editor, who has some breaking news for us. Mark.
Well, astonishing news that has come through now from, again, the police who've been speaking to local reporters there, saying that they believe 2 survivors have now been found from this Air India 787 aircraft. 1 survivor found at the scene of the impact of this aircraft, and another survivor, it seems, has been found at the hospital, had been taken to the hospital among dozens of other people who were injured on the ground. And it seems now that the indications are that this person was not someone injured on the ground, but someone who was on the aircraft. Now, earlier, of course, we brought you that news from the police commissioner in Ahmedabad, who said that they believed, all indications were, there were no survivors on this aircraft. But we did say that you know, people will hope against hope that there's always this chance of a miracle. So if confirmed, these are reports, and we've got to just put the caveat out there. Sometimes these reports are subject to change depending on what a particular police chief has been told from the scene. But certainly an encouraging piece of news indicating that one survivor has been found at the scene of this plane crash, and that another survivor may have been found among the injured in hospital.
I mean, just astonishing, astonishing news. And you do sometimes read about these absolute miracles of planes dropping out of the sky and somehow someone, anecdotally, usually someone towards the back of the plane rather than the front of the plane, seemed to get sort of the last bit of impact. I've read cases of people sort of falling out of planes and dropping into canopies of trees and managing to be survived in that way. I mean, sometimes things that seem utterly impossible or improbable really do happen. But these are still initial reports, and as far as we can see, the police have found one survivor they think is from the plane, and the other survivor of the two could have been from the building. But it's so difficult because everyone's so sort of muddled up when a plane smashes into a building. Yeah, absolutely, and the sort of the forward motion of that aircraft as it's smashing into buildings in that sort of residential area, home to so many of these medical students. It's aviation fuel is being spilt everywhere, is on fire. Passengers that would have been on the plane, as you say, would, you know, find themselves embedded into buildings. I mean, it's just utterly horrific. Now, it's possible, looking at the images that we saw earlier of the back end of the plane. I mean, it is the very end of the aircraft that appears to have clipped it, because, of course, the picture there, that end section has sheared off and so not caught up in the huge explosion in Fireball. So it's possible, perhaps, that people who were sat towards the rear of the aircraft, where that aircraft split, they've been thrown free or something like that. We just, again, you know, we're just speculating.
That would be incredible, wouldn't it? I just want to let people know that Rishi Sunak, the former Prime Minister, of course, whose parents from India, he's made a statement. He says his and his wife are deeply shocked and distressed by the tragedy. He says there's a unique bond between our two nations. Our thoughts and prayers go out to British and Indian families who have lost loved ones today. So that's Rishi Sunak, former UK Prime Minister, with his message to those who've been involved in this incident. But yes, that news that potentially there could be one survivor who managed to survive that plane crash. I mean, against all odds.
What a miracle if that is true. Mark, do stay with us. We're hearing more and more about this plane crash every single minute. But let's cross over now to our political editor, Christopher Hope, who has more that he can tell us.
That's right, Tom and Emily. Now, the UK government is getting organised of trying to deal with these horrific images you're seeing on screen from Ahmedabad. We can say now that the UK is sending 4 air accident investigators now, or tonight, to Ahmedabad. They're flying from London Heathrow, arriving tomorrow afternoon. The Department of Transport has told us this. The Indian Air Accident Investigation Bureau has accepted the UK's Accident Investigation Branch's offer of assistance, and we're deploying a team of 4 inspectors to Ahmedabad. The government is also sending a liaison person to Gatwick Airport, where, of course, it's likely that families are gathering there to try and get some news of what happened to their members of the family who may be on their way, of course, from Ahmedabad to Gatwick. So the Department for Transport, which is now getting involved with the investigation of what caused this dreadful crash. All sorts of speculation on social media and elsewhere, but the UK is getting involved, and this is all part of the process. India and the UK have an agreement to support each other in times of air crashes. This is quite normal.
So that is a significant piece of news there, sort of cooperation on this scale between British and Indian authorities too. I mean, this is something that that shows that there will be a strong response, perhaps diplomatically, politically, to all of this. Let's not forget, this is just weeks after the UK and India signed an unprecedented and comprehensive free trade agreement with the Prime Minister Keir Starmer and the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi striking up some sort of relationship.
Yeah, that's right. Increasingly, we are, they're a close ally of ours. They always were, and increasingly so with that trade deal being signed by Sir Keir Starmer and Narendra Modi. We don't know yet if we'll hear on camera from Sir Keir Starmer later. We, of course, have heard from Rishi Sunak, the former UK Prime Minister, who's of Indian heritage, in recent minutes. Yeah, no question that we have got a close relationship, and when these things happen, it does tend to happen that countries do liaise together. There's a bilateral deal with India, and that's now being triggered with the sending of 4 air accident investigators from the UK tonight to Ahmedabad, and of course 1 liaison individual going to Gatwick to help families there.
OK, Christopher, thank you so much. Christopher Hope, our political editor there in Westminster, for us with that breaking news. We're going to take a very quick break, and we'll be back very shortly. Stick with us.
From the school run to the home run, watch a new show for all of Britain.
He can say whatever he wants.
A straight-talking show where all voices are heard.
And, when are we going to stop talking about smashing the gangs and actually do it?
With the stories that matter from every part of our country.
There's a bit of a crash landing there for your Chancellor.
Bold, fearless and standing up for you. That's me, Martin Daubney, 3 p.m. till 6 p.m, weekdays, here only on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster's full of talk, but out here, it's the real world.
Am I allowed to talk now?
No, that's it. This is where it matters, real people and real lives. That's what politics is all about.
In fact, has Trump made a good start? No.
Straight answers, no spin, and just a couple of pints. How many fingers have I ever got up?
About 10.
So join me for Lee Anderson's Real World every Friday at 7 p.m, only on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Exciting news. Every Friday, my Patrick Christie's Tonight Show is going to have a twist to it. We're welcoming some special guests. You. That's right, on Fridays I'm going to be doing my show in front of a live studio audience because this show is about you and what you have to say. It's going to be the same big debates, same big topics, same big opinions. But every Friday night at 9 p.m, you are invited to come on down to Patrick Christie's Tonight to be a part of the action. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation,
no,
isn't it?
No,
because the failure is
you're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back.
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
And we do not shy away from the difficult stuff. Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood. So join me on Jubes & Co weeknights at 6 p.m, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
You want to know what's really going on in the corridors of power? Labour don't know what to do with you half the time, and that makes you quite lethal in the chamber. Get behind the headlines with Chopper's Political Podcast. Join me, Christopher Hope, as I sit down with the great and the good of British politics. We'll see where this ruling takes us. These are the stories shaping our nation. Chopper's Political Podcast, available now on all platforms. Listen in and stay ahead.
This Saturday, join GB News as we mark the King's official birthday. Trooping the Colour, hosted by Charlie Peters, Miriam Cates and me, Cameron Walker, live from Buckingham Palace from 10 a.m. this Saturday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Bev Turner. Thank you for joining us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 48 minutes past 2. We've been learning more information about this terrible plane crash in India. A plane, of course, due to land this evening in Gatwick and instead only managing less than 5 minutes of its flight, coming down in the highly populated Indian city of Ahmedabad. And yet, after hours of reporting on this, assuming every single passenger aboard this plane had perished, we now get reports that at least one, possibly two passengers on that plane have actually survived.
Yeah, which would be quite incredible. Let's speak to aviation security expert Julian Bray. Julian, remarkable, if true, if there are, in fact, one or even two survivors from this horrific plane crash. We've all seen the footage by now. Julian, how would someone survive such a thing?
Yes, good afternoon. To be fair, the police did say apparently all dead. They didn't confirm it exactly. What has happened is that if you look at the videos of the actual crash site, you'll see that the tail section of the aircraft is actually slammed into a two-story building, and there isn't any fire damage at all. So it is possible that people in the rear section of the aircraft managed or thrown from the aircraft on impact. So it's one of these stories that happens, and so for heaven's sake, that is good news. What will have happened, of course, is that local people would have been over that crash site and they would have immediately rushed any survivors to hospital or got them away safely. So it'd be a little while before the authorities actually knew that was happening. But it is a tragic incident, and we have to really consider now what has happened, because this is very, very unusual. It's not normal, because the plane actually reached 625 feet, and then something happens. Now, on one of the videos, and this is pure speculation on my part, there is a puff of smoke around the engine area. After that, the plane seems to start a descent, but it's a very level descent, a very straight descent. He doesn't deviate one way or the other. Meanwhile, the pilot is actually making a Mayday call, so he was well aware that something had happened. Now, it could be a bomb on board, it could be a device that's gone off, the pilot heard it, something happened, his controls are frozen because he cannot operate the wings or the tail, so it's on a very straight flight path, no deviation, and then goes into the side of the building, and then the fireball that we've seen.
And Julian, what do we know about standards in India in terms of pilot training? I'm assuming here, I don't know, that these two pilots, the pilot and the co-pilot, were trained in India. Are the standards the same as in this country, for example?
Not only the same, in some areas higher, because remember, these are international pilots, and any pilot can be taken off an aircraft and put through a simulated training session. Pilots basically have a license for 6 months, and they had to go and do their simulated check and be proven again. So it's continual assessment. The captain had 8,000 flying hours, as I understand it, and the first officer had over 1,000 hours. So these are two very highly experienced and capable pilots. So I don't have a problem about that. Air India has a pretty good safety record. So again, there are no worries there. And they do actually conform to all the international conventions. And you probably realize that the aviation industry is worldwide. It is like a big brotherhood. And if somebody's in trouble, then everybody else will pile in to assist. So even as we were getting news of this incident, there were recovery teams and experts on the way in the air flying towards India to assist. A team from Boeing has gone, I understand, so they will want to know exactly what's happened to the aircraft there. We have teams from the Civil Aviation Authority and also teams from the American authorities as well, the FAA, for example. They will all be on site, and they will work with the Indian authorities to try and work out what has happened here.
And what is perhaps really astonishing is that airport in Ahmedabad has continued flying planes in and out throughout. I suppose because that airport itself was not damaged as part of this crash. It occurred 1 or 2 kilometres or a bit further away. Julian Bray, thanks so much for explaining all of that there. What a fascinating story it was. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Well, you've been watching Good Afternoon Britain with me, Emily Carver, and Tom. We're going to be continuing our coverage and of other matters into the afternoon. You're with Martin Daubney. He's going to be bringing you through till 6 o'clock, so stick with us here on GB News.
Even though we'll see a cloudy start, it'll be a bright outlook for the rest of the day. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good afternoon. Yes, it's time for your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. We've got heat, we've got humidity, and we've got some big downpours, and as a result, Met Office yellow warnings have been issued. We've already seen some pretty heavy rain around this area of low pressure across parts of the west today. That low pressure is wafting the air up from the south. That's why it's warm, that's why it's humid. Plenty of sunshine over eastern England and much of Scotland, but in Scotland in particular, that rain is marching northwards. Very heavy still through the afternoon across Northern Ireland, spreading into western Scotland, easing off a bit as it does so, but still some hefty downpours likely this evening, particularly over North Wales, northwest England and southwest Scotland. Even as it turns dry, it will stay warm and humid. The winds will be easing, but temperatures holding up in the mid-teens in most towns and cities. Now, Friday is another fine day for a good part of the country. Certainly sunny skies across much of northeast Scotland. It won't be as windy here as well. There won't be as much of that low cloud lapping onto the coast. Still pretty cloudy in Northern Ireland. Maybe not as persistent, the rain, as today, but some heavy downpours likely here, especially around the middle part of the day. We start largely dry across England and Wales, maybe 1 or 2 showers in West Wales, but they shouldn't be as intense, again, as the downpours have been today, at least at this stage. Most of us will have a fine, bright day tomorrow. Plenty of very warm, if not hot, sunshine, especially in the east, but further south, the storms are gathering once more. We'll see some hefty downpours returning to parts of the south coast by the end of the afternoon. Warm and humid for most places, and look at these numbers across eastern England with some sunshine getting up into the high 20s. The thundery showers then march northwards during Friday evening. The potential for some disruption as they affect parts of southern England, spread into Wales, and then drift northwards through the night into the Midlands and eventually into northern England. Still some of those heavy downpours around on Saturday. Met Office warnings are in place, so check those website, the Met Office website, for full details.
Expect a warm front, moving from the kitchen right through to the rest of the house. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
We're kick-starting summer with your chance to win our biggest cash prize to date, as there's an incredible £54,321 in tax-free cash to be won. What would you spend it on? A brand new car, the holiday of a lifetime, or just sit back, relax and remove some of those day-to-day financial stresses? For a chance to win £54,321 cash, text cash to 63225. One entry costs £2.50 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63225. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start at £2.50. Call 0903 686 3232. Calls cost £2.50 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB14 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 4 p.m. on the 1st of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Well, there's a reason it's called school term, and that is all those little kids should be at school, not elsewhere. Now, I know a lot of people find that difficult to comprehend because they're thinking, well, that doesn't suit me and it's cheaper to go then and whatever it is. But in my whole life, my parents would never have said, take 2 weeks off school or take a week off school. No. So I find this very, very hard to... It just shouldn't be part of the equation. You're at school. You're not on holiday.
Well, lots of parents would say, wouldn't they? They can't afford to take their children in half term because the flights have tripled.
Totally agree, but we couldn't afford it. So what did we do? We went to the local beaches